Oh, really?
Oh yeah, like we were like bathing our 9-year-old, right? You know, we practically, I mean, it felt like, and then by the time the youngest is 5, you're like, go upstairs, shower, brush your teeth,
That
get in
sounds
bed,
awesome. I
and
mean,
it's
I haven't
done.
had a full night's sleep and I don't even remember.
Okay, we are live and we are ready.
All right, ready to go? We're rolling. Mics are on. We're hot.
Ready.
All right, good
You
deal.
just speak really into the microphone.
Get in there, tight with it. All right, let me give me a little bit more cord here. Maybe. I'll just lean in. I got a long neck. All right, let's bring the meeting to order here. We got City of Rollingwood Board of Adjustment meeting Monday, September 13th, 2021. It's 6:08. Agenda item number 1, we'll do a roll call. Chris Braden, present. We'll just go down for you, Jim, if you don't mind. Is Jim going?
Brooke Brown, present.
Brad O'Donnell, present.
Keith Martinson, present.
And make sure we give time here to get the mics on.
There you go.
We're good now?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, great. We'll move on with that. We'll move to the public comment. Do we have any citizens wishing to address? We got a couple walking in. We're good there. Is that a sign-up sheet deal?
I don't have anything for items not on the agenda.
No non-agenda items? Okay. All right, with that, we'll move on to item number, looks like 2, discussion and possible action on the minutes from the June 22nd, 2021 Board of Adjustment meeting. Any discussion there? I'm not even sure which one was that.
That was, Brooke, you wanted to make some corrections to that one, right?
They've been made.
They've been made.
Already
So it's back.
reflected?
It's back as corrected, yes.
Okay.
So
already
you're,
reflected.
you're good with it?
Yes.
All right, well then I move to approve the minutes from June 22nd.
Chris, I'll second it.
Great, let's take a vote on that. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. All right, that passes. Item number 2 passes for the June 22nd meeting. We'll discuss and take possible action on the minutes from August 17th BOA meeting. Anything to note there?
No corrections here?
No note?
I'll move that we accept them.
All right,
I second.
cool. Let's take a vote on that. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, that passes as well. We'll move on to the regular agenda. Item number 4, public hearing. Thank you very much. Public hearing, discussion of possible action on a variance from the city's code of ordinances, section 107-35. No tennis court shall be constructed or maintained in the area between the rear setback line and the rear lot line for the Western Hills Athletic Club at 4801 Rollingwood Drive. All right, so I guess I'd say we're here again because, we had to notice correctly to the whole city. So we've kind of been down the road, but I think to do it right, we've got to do it all the way through again, as we should. Does anybody have any? What's the next move on that, Amber?
You can ask for a motion, or you could ask for presentation by the applicants.
We'll do maybe ask the applicants if they've got a presentation, number 1. Anything to speak on?
I mean, I have some things to discuss. I mean, I kind of felt like we went through it pretty extensively last time, and it's the same panel.
Sure.
But I was planning on speaking. We do have our engineers here as well.
Yeah, you just want to give a quick summary and.
Yeah.
If you would go to the microphone, please, and state your name for the record.
So I'm going to recommend that this is a new process. This is a new record. If anything comes of this, this is the process and the record that would be used to establish decision-making. So we need to treat this like it's the first time we've seen it.
Pretend like brand new deal, right?
Okay.
You got it. We'll do it.
I have a question, and this may go to our city attorney, and that is whether the applicant are any of the opponents need to be sworn before they make their presentations?
It's not a requirement under the law. We can do that if that's part of our process, but it's not a requirement under the law.
I've seen it done both ways.
Yeah, it's not a requirement under the law, so.
We've never done it here that I recall.
Okay, I watched one meeting, and someone from Charlie's office, not here today, did require that the witnesses be sworn.
Each one?
Yes.
We did have one meeting with Sarah Griffin where she swore everybody in, but that
Okay,
was.
well, again, not a requirement under the law. Just
Okay.
because it's not a requirement in the law doesn't mean it can't be done and shouldn't be done. It's just not a requirement under the law. So it's up to this body whether or not you want to swear folks in.
I'm comfortable not, but I don't have any aversion to either. I don't know really what's accomplished by either way, just to be clear.
I'm happy to go with whatever
Okay,
the chair would.
we're comfortable kind of moving forward then? Good?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, we're not drilling
Yeah.
anyone, they're just.
You got it,
giving
yeah.
presentations.
I'm not much of a prosecutor. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Marie Timmerman, and I'm on the board of WAC, and I also live at 501 Vale Street. This has been a really, really long process for us. We're coming on a year of trying to get a permit. And I have to say, at nights, I kind of wonder about my inclination to volunteer for stuff. Today, to be honest, my stomach's been in knots, anticipating what the latest procedural maneuver is going to be to try to delay our project. And I'd like to think that that's not going to happen, but our experience has led me to feel differently. It's really hard for me to comprehend why we're having so much difficulty, because we are genuinely trying to provide something good for this community. We were committed to this project prior to COVID, and I can only say that since we've been going through this pandemic, it's only strengthened our belief that these types of amenities are really important to people. I can say from my own experience, like, that is what we did. We got out of the house and we played tennis as a family, and that was like our escape from that horrible time where we were all kind of locked up. In general, tennis boomed during this pandemic. There was a 22% increase in the amount of people playing tennis. I also read in USA Today there was a 44% increase in last year in the amount of entry-level racket sales. That is huge. And I feel like that has been reflected in our WAC community. We were not planning on introducing any new programming to our club, but this process has taken so long. We were thinking we would do it after we got new courts, but, and the member demand was so high that in May we hired an additional tennis pro. He has been doing some program development, and we started in May. As of August, we had 40 juniors participating in our program. We also did a trial week of tennis camp, and that sold out, so we had to add an additional week. Which is kind of amazing because July and August are really slow months for our club. It's when everyone goes on vacation. And I think people were even more actively going on vacation this year because they felt a little braver with vaccinations and such. Our adult program, I talked to our pro on Saturday. Our adult program is almost at capacity, and he has several of these like beginner adult players that want us to open up even more slots so they can play multiple times a week. So the interest level is definitely there for this, and it really, really we're trying to do a positive thing for the community. We are here tonight on a limited issue. We are looking for relief from these 3 ordinances that relate to our setback. Nothing else. Nothing pervious cover, nothing drainage. That's not what we're looking for. Previously, even though we're on a new record, this panel determined that the people that granting that variance would affect are the people that share a boundary with us. And you conditionally granted it if we got written approval of those neighbors. We had those letters to the city by July 1st, essentially a week later, so we complied with what the ask was. So assuming that you feel the same, that really granting this variance really only could potentially harm those that share a boundary with us, then I would ask that you grant the variance without any conditions. That's all I got. Oh, I also want to point out that the area that we are planning on extending the courts into, there's an existing volleyball court. So it's not like we are removing a 30-foot greenbelt setback that's already there. We have a recreational use in place, and we are just changing the specific recreational use to tennis/pickleball. And that is our plan. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Our engineers are here as well, but I know there's a lot of other people that want to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Bree. So I'm going to go by the sheet right here, right, Amber? Yeah, so Dan McMahon? Did I say your last name correctly, sir? McMahon? Okay, got it.
Well, thanks all for putting up with all this. I do have a different take on things than Marie has. I know she's earnest in her approach, but let me just tell you some of the things
Dan, can I interrupt you real quick? Can you
Yeah.
just state your name and
Yeah, I'm
address?
sorry,
Just for
I'm
the,
sorry.
Yeah, you got it.
Can you please speak into, I know we all have masks
Yep.
on, so it's gonna be even harder for us to hear.
Sure.
So if you can just make sure you speak right into the microphone for everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dan McMahon, live at 6 Pleasant Cove. Been there for 24 years. I've served on the Board of Adjustments a few years back. So I'm somewhat familiar with this routine. At any rate, when the notice for the variance request was received, I wasn't initially concerned about it because I thought, how could something with this many non-conforming uses, violations of ordinances, could be approved? But like all things, there are two sides to it, and there are emotional sides and there are factual sides. And the facts are that while the variance request violates two ordinances that we know of, if we grant this ordinance, that would become three. And then, and perhaps since the engineers are here, they can speak to the drainage, impervious drainage calculations, because I think that it's interesting that there's a conflict in the amount of the size of the property. Travis County Appraisal District says 3.1 acres. The calculations are based on 3.2 acres. And if you, for some weird reason, there's frontage along Rollingwood Drive that's not included with sidewalks. Also, the swimming pool is not included as impervious cover, which is just silly, because clearly that is impervious cover, but there's some, I think, arcane references in the Code of Ordinances that say that the swimming pool can be omitted from the calculation of impervious cover, but it relates to a water quality issue and not site development. So one of the things I did was, I got laughed at the last time I had a hand drawing, but I made a calculation. I used the map that was, it's in the packet, to show where the pool is, which is this area here in yellow, and this area in orange along the bottom. Those are areas that were excluded from the calculation of the impervious coverage. When those areas are added back in, then it goes up to around 58% impervious cover. The engineers can dispute that and tell me if they are calculating it differently, but at least based on the information in the packet, I believe I did that correctly. The other thing is the use of retention ponds. It's very common, of course, to use retention ponds. Less common to have them underground, but there are issues with retention ponds that over time they become filled with sedimentation. They have to be cleaned. Having them underground makes them even more difficult to clean out. I think there's a mosquito issue possibility, and I think there's also evidence if you check that if you have a tennis court over water, that the water will oftentimes be absorbed through the concrete and cause bubbling in the elastomeric surface. Not sure about that, but that's something I have been told. And, you know, obviously you can get on the internet and check that out. The other part of this is that I think that the removal of some of these trees, we've all heard about this. There are 3 big oaks on there, 27 and a half, a 20, and an 18-inch. Those trees are going to be replaced by 3 12-foot tall, 6-inch caliper cedar elms. I think that's a terrible thing to replace a tree that's been there 50, 75 years with one that's been growing in a pot for maybe 5 years. I think that the other thing that bothers me, and I just see it differently. I don't see this as a community amenity. WAC is a private club. It's going to be a private club whether you have this variance granted or not. The public is not now invited, nor will they be when this is done. I don't think those members who have paid a good bit of money to belong to the club will invite the public in, and maybe nor should they. It'd be a nice amenity for those that can afford it, but there'll be a lot of Rollingwood residents that it's not available to. The last thing I want to say is it relates to these 7, in the ordinance 107-492, there are 7 elements that are required to be addressed or answered before a variance can be granted. Of those 7, we can argue about whether some of them relate to us or not. Some do, some may not. It's arguable. But the last one, the number 7th one, it requires that if I could just read this last part of it, it says, granting the variance will not merely serve as a convenience to the applicant, but will alleviate some demonstrable and unusual hardship or difficulty so great as to warrant such variance. You know, we are a city of laws and ordinances, and I think if this thing was played by the books, I don't think I would have the attitude that I have now, but I am concerned about the drainage. And maybe the engineers can soften that for me, but I'm concerned about that being a problem because only a couple of 1 or 2 inches more rise in our backyard, and we may very well have water on our back porch. So with that, I thank you for listening, and thank you, members, for your service.
Thank you, Dan.
Yes, sir.
Barry McMahon.
Good evening. I'm Mary McMahon, Dan's other half. We live at 6 Pleasant Cove, which is directly downstream from the Western Hills Athletic Club. We've been in Rollingwood for 30 years. I've served on the Park Commission. We were members of the Western Hills Athletic Club for 20 years. We loved it. It's a great club. We do have some concerns about the addition of the tennis courts. First of all, I wanted to make a correction on the last meeting. I believe it was Marie that said that she had tried to contact us about the tennis court, but I've checked our records. I listened to every kind of message on all of our technology, and I don't have any recording at all of any kind of phone call. We've had the same telephone number that's posted in the directory for 30 years since we first moved here, so I don't understand why she wasn't able to contact us. Another thing that I'd like to mention is that at the last meeting, you all decided that the decision on this might be based on the people that are actually share a boundary with the Western Hills Athletic Club. Well, our situation is much more, we feel like it's much more concerning and important because we are directly downstream from the drainage. If you look at the maps, you can see the arrows. They go out of the retention pond underneath the tennis court, and they go directly onto our property. And our property drains directly down Pleasant Cove to Nixon, where the city of Rollingwood is spending $1 million or more to try to correct the drainage issues. So you're going to have more drainage going down to that area. Okay, so not only am I concerned about the violation of the 3 city ordinances, but we're also concerned about our home. When I was looking into retention ponds, I happened to talk to a man who is a big tennis player. He said if they put water underneath the tennis court, it's invariably going to bubble up. He said it's just, this is probably inevitable. I have a little bit of proof about this also in my papers here. As Dan mentioned, cleaning the retention pond would be a nightmare. You have debris, you have mosquitoes, you have pesticides you have to use, and herbicides you have to use. You'd have to get special grates. And one thing that actually chilled my blood is that so many of the articles that I've found about retention ponds talk about children drowning. They said children are attracted to water, and retention ponds offer ready access. Unlike swimming pools, these basins typically aren't fenced in. In this case, it would have to be fenced in. But if you get a good enough grate and fence, how are you going to open it, get in there, clean it out? I don't know. They can also be deep and have a steep drop-off at the water's edge, since they're designed for maximum rainwater collection. Muddy bottoms and slippery sides can make it difficult for someone to escape. Since mosquitoes breed in any still water you can find your retention ponds can become a nuisance to residential neighbors. So they recommend having some kind of aerator, fountains, all kinds of remediation. Some of the algae and the different bacteria that grow in these retention ponds are actually very toxic. Okay, as far as homeowners' liability, if you have a retention pond near your house, it's one of homeowners' greatest liability and expense. Not only do they pose a drowning hazard to residents, but require continuous maintenance and planning. Because of the high cost of initial installation, monthly maintenance, and periodic removal of sediment buildup is recommended, so that associations set aside 12% of their yearly budget for a small retention pond and up to 35% for a larger pond. These are probably open ponds, but I can't imagine how much more difficult it would be to maintain a pond underneath a tennis court. Okay, once again, they say, for example, there is a constant danger of drowning for families with young children. Should the pond ever overflow, this is my concern, your home may be the first to flood. And finally, retention basins can affect property value depending on how they are maintained and how well they function. In this case, sadly, we are not comfortable with the statistics and the calculations of the impervious cover or the engineering that's been done. Potential buyers should be aware of who owns the pond and how well they protect the investment before moving in. So this is just about homeowners. Okay, here is the last thing I was going to mention, which is about the tennis court. This is from the Sarasota newspaper, or the Property Finders. Okay, Sarasota and Siesta Key spent $21 million to create more parking spaces. And they did this in a beautiful design. However, they're having huge problems. It said, unfortunately, the process has not been without its share of glitches. One of the biggest issues is rubberized paints on the tennis courts has already started to bubble up due to moisture underneath. Contractors are now seeking solutions. But those of us who play tennis know that an uneven court, what it can do to the trajectory of a tennis ball. So I just think there's so many things to be addressed here. I love the game of tennis. I'm not against tennis, but I feel like, I just feel like this is something that we should not approve.
Thank you, Mary. Tolly?
Hello, my name is Tolly Bernard, and I live at 306 Inwood Road here in Rollingwood. I've been a resident since 2007. Served 6 years on the board of directors for WAC. And I'm speaking today to lend my support to build the tennis courts. Today, I really just want to speak about inclusivity and utility. I think Rollingwood Pool, as I affectionately call it, is a unique asset. We are a private club in the heart of our city. With that said, we are inclusive in pretty much everything we do with our programs, to the point where in all of our programs, minus one, which is our summer swim program, the outside members or non-members represent over 50% of the participation in those programs. And that's our youth programs, our master swim program, even our tennis lessons have been open to other community members. And we have one of the friendliest, in my opinion, guest programs, which encourages members and guests, because it only costs $1 per guest member to come and join and participate and use our pool and our resources. And I'm sharing this because, contrary to, I think, what was said before by Dan, is that I feel like this is a very unique thing in a community to have a private club, which in Austin is typically very exclusive, and I feel like Rollingwood Pool has always been very inclusive of the community, of our neighbors. And so I think that's a really special thing. I just wanted to point that out. The other thing is utility. While on the Rollingwood Pool Board, we obviously spend a lot of time thinking about the utilization of our assets. You know, what are kids doing? What do parents want? Where are people spending their time? And in truth, today, I would say, and even in the past, we are a swimming and family social club. And we just happen to have two very dilapidated tennis courts and a really sad volleyball court and a sport court that has had better days. And I think by utilizing this plan, the utility of our club is going to increase so much because we have so much space. It was never our objective on the board to maximize space. You have to have some space that's not used. But in this case, we have such a large area that is essentially unused, including our tennis courts. And so this plan, I believe, would actually increase the utilization for our club, and not only just our club, our whole community. So I would like to just encourage you to consider that when thinking about these issues. I think having the tennis courts there will open up a whole nother venue for parents, for kids, and the community alike to participate in what has been a really special public-private partnership with the city of Rollingwood. Thank you.
Thank you, Tolly. Marnie?
Hello. Hi, friends and neighbors. My name is Marnie Fitzgerald, and I live at 442 Ridgewood Road. I also served for 6 years on the WAC board, but that was years ago. I served during the construction of the remodeled bathhouse. And I'm here in support of the allowance of this variance for the tennis courts. I can speak from 12 years of time at this club that the current tennis courts have been unusable pretty much the entire time. And it really is a disservice to our membership and to our community. I also I was going to reiterate basically the same thing that Tolly said, was that our little private club is so open to guests and anyone who wants to participate in a program can just pay a very small fee and join. I feel like a lot of our current membership, we call it aging out. When our children get a little bit older, a lot of adult members leave. Retaining a great tennis program and a tennis area on this property will retain those members, older members like myself, to continue to play sports and be involved in our community. The only other thing I wanted to point out after listening to the McMahons, who I really appreciate you guys speaking your concerns. Most of those concerns, I believe, having served on this board at the WAC, most of those concerns are addressable issues. They are concerning issues, but they're all addressable, whether the right greats are selected, whether the courts bubble, whether there are mosquito issues. All of those things will be addressed well ahead of building. I mean, it will be no surprise to anyone on the board or in the construction service of those needs. And it would be irresponsible of anybody on the WAC board to move ahead without addressing those concerns. And that's all I really wanted to say. I would like to offer, if I am allowed to give my time to any of the engineers that are here to speak to those concerns also. I don't know if they're on the list to speak, but they can take my time if they want to.
I'm trying to not make I don't figure out all the rules here.
Okay.
And what do we got over there?
You can request a presentation of the applicant, which would include the engineers later after you've gone through all of the comments for the public hearing.
After we've gone through the comments?
Yes, after you close the public hearing, and then you can hear a presentation.
Okay, I do think it's a good idea, and only in this regard. I mean, I understand that we are here to deal with, 3 specific variances. I think, however, I mean, when we're in a small community and you've got, 2 property owners that I believe, and I only can say this, I think from the standpoint that we've kind of been through this before, having had a meeting on it, obviously needing to notice differently. But I believe that at least with the engineers here, that they could potentially address some of those concerns that you have. And outside of just dealing with the variances and however it turns out, I'd hope that you'd be able to leave here as, as neighbors, kind of feeling a little bit more at ease about, what's going to go on downstream from you. Is that an accurate assessment? Would you appreciate that? I'm speaking to you directly, Mary. And
I'm sorry, would I appreciate that?
yeah, I mean, I figure, I mean, that's a community service, in my opinion. Yeah, I'd like to try to address that. Right, you know what I mean? So again, I think that's a great idea, Marnie. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, but Aaron, we've got to do that after the sign-up sheet?
Right, please go through everybody on the list.
Yeah, you got it. Okay, and I think I'm reading this right. Is it Zach Elkins? Yeah. No, that's right. I mean, it's better than my handwriting, so.
Yeah, so Zach Elkins, 16 North Peak Road, and thanks for allowing me to offer a few comments, and thanks for everybody who's using their time for this, the board and everybody else, whatever side they're on. In general, my thought is that this is a pretty thoughtful, incremental improvement to the club, and I appreciate the pool board's year-long effort to get this going. I think it's the kind of thing that's going to add a lot to the community, and many of us see the Rollwood Pool really as a gem and a treasured space that many of us in some ways moved here for. And I think it makes sense that, after however many years it is that the pool is developed, to then think about some modest improvements along the way. And this seems to me that, and I appreciate the concerns of the McMahons, which I sympathize with. And a couple of things I heard, I mean, in addition to what Tolly said about a very inclusive environment at the club, it is private, yes, but it's not like, say, Austin Country Club with enormous investments to get in, and it's, especially given the median value of homes here these days, it's a fairly modest investment, and it's been, in my experience, fairly inclusive in that respect. And those who are really excited with kids, who want them to swim and play tennis, I think find it accessible. I'm also sympathetic to the trees, and I think whatever happens with the plan, I think landscaping should be first and foremost, and should think about replacing those trees with decent size trees that sort of grace the tennis court. I think, it's as the site was obviously developed a long time ago, and you only realize what you want to do with the space and what the optimal use of the space is after a while. And of course, you need to adapt to changing circumstances, what's popular and what's not. And I think inevitably you have to do some of those things. And now and then, much as we hate it, a tree would go. But I think you can replace those trees, and in 10 and 15 years, hopefully you have very good-looking trees, maybe in better places. With respect to tennis, I think it's a big part of the club, or should be a big part of the club. It is, as I think was suggested, it's something that goes across generations. And so my kids play, I play, and I turned 50, and my parents play, they're in their 80s, and it's one of the few sports that you can really work across generations. And it is a shame when people age out of the club and they no longer have that nervous start to swim their 25-yard dash. I think there's some direct benefits for those who are playing. And it also, I think, has a lot of indirect benefits, in part because the club is something, as I said, that a lot of people here move here for. And even if their kids age out, it does, since it is somewhat of a gem, it's helpful for everybody in some ways to have that. And as long as it's landscaped nicely and fits in with the neighborhood, I think it actually can grace the neighborhood really quite nicely. With respect to the impact, in my experience, I think these projects can be done in a way that are almost inconspicuous in some ways. And tennis is one of those games that for whatever reason, is kind of low impact in terms of neighbors, in part because there are only a few people, by definition, who can be on the court at the same time. It's one of those sports where you have this hushed, quiet environment, it's also, let's face it, just a surface, and you're not necessarily building any structure except for the fences. And so if you were to build something, it seems like one of the lowest impact things you can do. And I understand that the fences is a bit of a structure, but I think even those could be done more gracefully. And as it is, the tennis courts, they are, I don't know when the last time they've been resurfaced are. They're cracked. There's this strange concrete hill between the two courts. There's these leaning, rusted chain link fences, and I think it does make sense to do a renovation. In the process of doing a renovation, I think it makes sense to think how you can make better use of the property and the land and the activities that people want to do. I think it also makes sense to take a look at some other examples that are out there. And I was at the last meeting on this, and I mentioned as one reference point Terry House in Terrytown, which is almost is perfectly comparable. It's about the same size lot. They built 4 courts. Two of them, I think, are clay because they had to deal with impervious cover in a maybe more constraining way that we had to do here. But it really blends in naturally into the neighborhood. If you drive past those courts, you don't even know it exists. And the neighbors, as far as I can tell, seem to be pretty okay about it. So I'll just end there. I mean, I'm usually pretty skeptical about development projects in general, but it seems like the board here has really just, true hearts and really no motive that I can imagine anything other than building something in the public interest. And obviously, it's really hard to do that for reasons that we all know in every single development project. And I think this is one that I think we should try to accommodate and support to the extent we can. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Zach. Mark Vaughn. Mark?
I put my name on the list, but I don't have any comments at the moment.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Thank you, Mark. And then Brad Walters.
Hello, Brad Walters, 2702 Rollingwood Drive. I've been in Rollingwood 15 years, something like that. I just wanted to speak in support of the tennis courts. Tennis is a, lifetime sport. As Zach mentioned, it's a great way for, generations to spend time together, grandparents, parents, kids. Pickleball, which you can play on a tennis court, is even more of a lifetime sport. I think the great-grandparents can play that one. It's a great way to get kids and adults outside, kind of off the screens. So I think anything we can do in our society to encourage being outside and spending time together is good. Building community and relationships. And then I guess the last thing is as far as the technical aspects of the design and drainage and issues like that, I think that we have very capable civil engineers that I'm assuming would be working on this and could address those different issues. So not without, it wouldn't be without some changes to the community, but I think it would be all a benefit. So just wanted to support it.
Thank you, Brad. So that is the end of our, yes?
Got one more public comment.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, yeah.
Sorry, late edition.
No, all good.
Hi, Catherine Scott, 303 Farley Trail. I am here to speak in favor of the courts today. Hi, Mary. It's Catherine Scott. Good to see you. I served 6 years on the pool board and president the last year when we went ahead and approved this, which was over two some years ago. And I wanted to just make a brief comment and say thank you, first of all, to all of y'all, because I know that this has been a very long process, probably longer than I know that any of y'all expected, and I know that the pool board has definitely not anticipated all of this. So I would like to say that I know how hard that the board is working to answer all the questions and jump over all the hurdles that have come their way, anticipated and unanticipated. I know they have tried very diligently to address a lot of concerns that have come up from both McMahon's and some of the city council members. And I think at every turn, they have really tried to bend and sway to answer these questions and accommodate any concerns. I think they'd be willing to take some of your concerns, hear them, and potentially work with you as neighboring residents. We have always prided ourselves at the pool with having a working relationship with our neighbors as a part of this neighborhood. We feel very connected to this community, even though we are a private entity. It is truly a very obvious gathering point for this community. And all we want is just some small improvements that are just so far overdue. In fact, if anything, they are a hazard at the state. And they have got to be addressed because we've put them off for so terribly long. So I would urge you tonight, please, to listen to the experts because we have spent time and energy and money to bring in people who can answer all of these questions regarding retention ponds and impervious cover and what is a pool. Is it impervious or not? So please, I urge you to listen to those, and I know you all have staff too. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you, Catherine. We've got a hand raised in a...
Sir, would you like this?
Yes, I would. My name's Duncan Ashworth. I live on Hatley Drive. Been there for 31 years. And I think it's important in matters like this to just go by the rules. And according to that, I have several questions that I didn't quite hear answered. One was that this is imposing a hardship, that the variance is requested because of a hardship. And I didn't really hear what that hardship is. I did hear that the courts are dilapidated and that sort of thing, but I don't understand what that has to do with the variance. Seems like a separate issue. The other one was this impervious cover. Heard numbers like 50%, 58%, and just wondering if all the engineers are in agreement with how much impervious cover it is. So that's another question I had. The other one is cutting down these heritage oaks that are in the area. And is that okay with the landscapers? Has, to the letter, can you cut down these old oak trees and plant a bunch of new ones? And that meets the requirement. And that was, I think one other thing that would have been important is when a speaker gets up here to identify if they're a member or not Western Hills Athletic Club. I personally am not. So anyway, I think that's important to know as well. And those are the questions I had, and so I think they need to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. We had, yeah, you had your hand raised as well, sir.
Oh, don't go that way. Sorry, the cord there, I don't want you to trip.
First time I've been out of the house in 2 years. I'm Kevin Shell. I live at 300 Pleasant Drive. I've been here since 1998. I am a member of the pool for 2 months now after living here this long. I wasn't planning on talking today, but I've heard a couple things I just wanted to kind of just bring attention to. I don't have a problem with tennis courts. I like playing tennis. I don't have a problem with the club or anything that's happening at the club. But I do live in one of the properties that's been impacted by drainage for the last 15 years. And I heard earlier mentioned that the club's been dealing with this for years now, trying to get this problem, get through this process to get this done. And I appreciate how freaking hard that's probably been. And I've seen some of it. But we've been trying to get this drainage problem fixed for over 10 years. I've personally talked to 5 different mayors about it. And I respect that tonight is not about drainage, and your choices are not about drainage tonight. But my concern, I think some of the other neighbors' concerns are, if we get this wrong, we're just gonna make the problems worse. And there's been enough questions, issues brought up, that we're just not confident that people live downstream, that this is really gonna not make our situation worse. And having been in a situation, I live at the bottom of 50 acres. And we've had unfettered building happening up the hill for years since we put in the septic line. Some of our ordinances have gotten better, some of it have improved it, but a lot of that building was done. It's caused damage and created a safety issue, and it is now causing the city to spend over $1 million to fix the problem. I should point out, the city hasn't fixed the problem yet. This is the 3rd attempt that we're trying to fix it. I have confidence we're gonna get it done this time, but it hasn't been done yet. And so I kind of have a problem with going into some of these big projects without having fixed the big problem downhill first. So I do recognize you're not here to talk about drainage tonight. I accept that. But I did like the last commenter, or whoever said earlier, we do have experts tonight. Let's make sure we hear from them on these issues and make sure that we got everything, all the boxes checked on this. So maybe that's not what y'all are talking about tonight. Maybe you want to put things on hold until you make sure we got all that addressed. And maybe we have that done tonight. That's just another perspective of some folks that have dealt with long-standing problems from things moving along without really understanding their long-term ramifications of the thing, even something as simple and valuable to the community as some additional tennis courts. Thank you.
Thank you. Kevin, right?
Yes.
Okay, just make sure I had it correct. Okay. Anybody else? I think we've covered the majority of the room.
I wanted to ask a question to Mary. Is now the correct time for that?
Do you want me to or
Yeah, you want to close the public hearing and then we could ask questions.
Okay.
And then
is that, yeah, can then she, if it's a question, she's gonna respond,
I
right?
just wasn't sure if it was the right time or not.
All right, I'll close it. We'll close the public, time for public comment. It's 6:50, just about to turn over, 6:56. So we'll close that now, and Brad, go right ahead, sir.
Yeah, I live very close to the tennis courts, and I go by them a lot. You know, each day I drive by it, and I never see anyone playing on it, and that's probably because I guess you're saying that the courts are in disrepair. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the disrepair they're in, and then I'm not a member, but so I'm not sure how much desire there is for the tennis courts. So like, if you build it, will they come? And what's wrong?
Marie Timmerman again. So the courts are in a lot of disrepair. They have cracks throughout them. There is also now at the back of our bottom court, there's actually a part of the surface that has actually come off. So we have like a little divot there, which isn't preventing us from keeping them open at this point. But if that continues to happen in the playable area of the court, we're going to have to shut them down. Now, I will say these courts were built in 1976, and there's been like considerable development in how you build a tennis court. My guess is they are not built with tension concrete. And so a lot of the problems that we're having, we feel like if we rebuild them, they're going to be solved. We have tried to do like a Band-Aid several times and just resurface the top of them. And Marnie Fitzgerald was with the board at that point, and they very quickly just went back to cracking. And so cracking on a tennis court isn't great. You get bad bounces. It's just not. So a lot of our members that are tennis players kind of turn their nose up at our courts, and they're playing somewhere else. They complain, and they would love to be able to play in the neighborhood, but they're just substandard, so they won't play on them. I will say there's been a huge increase of beginners now playing on the courts because this kind of stuff isn't quite as important to them at their level of play, and so there's been a big increase there. The other thing is that we ran in our newsletter for about 9 weeks, talking about this project, and suggested anyone can send us emails or comments on it. During that time, we only got about 12 emails. They were all positive and just with suggestions. And a big suggestion that we got was, can we use these courts for pickleball also? Pickleball has also been another sport that is like heavily on the rise. I was doing like a search on Nextdoor the other night to see if there was like any big discussion about this project on Nextdoor. And I just found like a thing about, in Austin in 2023, there's going to be like these 3 big restaurants opening up, like with 12 pickleball courts on them. So that's also become a really popular sport. Again, outside, pretty socially distant. So we think that our community really would use it for that as well.
Do you have a voting system set up for?
We do not. So our process is just voting within the board.
Mm-hmm.
And our board does change, like potentially we could have 3 new members every year.
Mm-hmm.
This we have voted on twice.
Okay.
So we voted on, I think it was a couple years ago when Catherine Scott was president, and then we re-voted on it this year.
Did it pass?
It passed.
Both
Yeah.
times? And when you do something like this at your club, is there like an assessment that everyone pays in to?
I mean, there could be. That's not what we're planning on doing with this project. Okay. We are funding it ourselves. We are capable of doing that.
And could you just give me a little more information on how you know that your members really want this?
Well, I mean, I think we've had several people speak tonight. We also had, I think, in your packet there was like 12 letters in support as well. I mean, we've received emails in support, and they're always like, hey, the backboard, the line's not regulation, or that kind of stuff. Could we have like a gathering area around there too? Because it'd be great to people have tennis and then gather. I mean, it really is a great community sport, and there's no doubt in my mind. I mean, the pro that we hired, like, he builds programs. That's what he does, and he has 2 in Charlotte. He has built the 3 largest public tennis court programs going down there, I believe, is what it said. It's on his resume. And so we've already gotten a really positive response to the limited amount that we put out there, because we didn't want to put too much out there and then be like, oh, we're shutting it down, sorry. So we're really confident that this is a good use of the space, and it's something that our club wants. So does that help?
Yeah, just on a personal note, like when I go by, I'd rather see folks playing than.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And
just
part of that
being
is to do with the
disrepair,
state
no
of the
one playing.
courts. And the other piece of it is like, as with like our pool, like you can drive by our pool like after Waves season ends and it's a ghost town, like people would prefer to play tennis earlier in the morning and then later in the afternoon. Those are our peak times, and that's where we really run into the issue of, okay, some people want programming. We want junior tennis players to play, but then adults get off of work and they want to play too. So we try to balance that. We feel like 4 courts would let us do that, also accommodate pickleball, and also allow us to participate in leagues, which is something that you would need a minimum of 4 courts to do.
And is anyone using the volleyball court at all?
No.
Is it
Well,
become
I
a
mean, I think
soundtrack
there are some
for-
cats.
For the cats, okay.
I think there's some cats that use it. But yeah, that's, sometimes maybe kids head down there and, but there's not really any volleyball going on, to as my knowledge. But
Okay, cool, thank you.
So there's no plans in replacing the volleyball court someplace else in the land?
no. It's just not, it's not getting the use. We feel like this is an amenity that will get a lot of use, and that just hasn't, quite honestly, we have a dad on our board that's like, daughter plays volleyball, and he doesn't care. It's just not,
So how early do you start playing tennis?
How early?
Yeah.
I believe our courts, it's not till 9 that we're allowed to start playing.
Okay.
That's like in respect to the neighbors. I mean, the other issue we have is like, unlike with the pool where they have lights, we don't have lights, and I know you guys aren't going to get those to us. So, so you start to get a dusk and you can't see the ball. So it's really like, that time frame is really limited, and it just really makes it difficult to balance, the different interests that want to play.
Could I ask a question here?
Sure.
How do y'all do scheduling for the courts now?
So, we used to just be at like first come, first serve, but,
That's what I saw on the website.
yeah,
So I didn't-
there's we have an app. It's a Mind Batty app. I believe they also use it at Train for the Game.
I saw that for swimming, but I thought.
No, it's for tennis too.
It's for tennis too?
Yeah,
I
you can
thought
get
for-
on there and you can sign up for clinics, and you can also sign up for, we use the bottom court is reserved for, reservations, and then the top court right now is first come, first serve.
That's what I saw, was
yeah.
first come, first served.
So I can tell you from my own experience, I wanted to play at 9 o'clock on Saturday, and drove down to the courts. They were both busy, so drove back around 10, and one was open, the other one was being used by 4 women playing doubles. And then during the time when we were still there, then a lesson came on of 3 little girls all dressed in pink taking a lesson. So, I mean, I feel like they're getting used. I feel like they would be used more if they were actually like decent courts. And I definitely feel like with the programming that we want to introduce, I think it's going to blow up, personally. But
Jim, do you have any questions? Say again?
I have another question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. One of the questions that came up as I was looking at the packet today is that the plans, the actual building plans that we had in our packet for this meeting were dated July 7 of 2020. And then I talked with Carrie today, and we discovered that there were updated plans dated December of 2020. And my question is, are the December 2020 plans final? Have there been changes since then?
that would be a better question for our engineer, David, and he can answer anything associated with that, because,
Well, and then this is another general question. And in terms of impact, and this may also be a question for the engineer, but in terms of impact, what I saw in the design drawings is that the impervious cover on the 3 acres that the 3+ acres that the club is on will increase by almost half. There's about 30, I think it's 37,000 square feet today that's impervious cover. This will add another 33,000 feet of impervious cover.
okay, I'll take your word for it.
Okay, so in my mind, that's not an insignificant impact, especially with respect to drainage.
I mean, all I can say on that is that, we've hired an expert. Our expert is following rules set out by the city that I think were developed by experts. And then our plan has also been reviewed by an independent expert that works for y'all. So I'm not an engineer. I'm not going to sit you and give you information on that. I can say about the impervious cover, there's, a rule, an understanding. I think it's 50% or.
This is not impervious cover. The issue goes to drainage.
Yes.
Because that amount of impervious cover creates a lot of water.
Right, but I would say that we have engineering plans that address that. I mean, and I think they're included in that packet. I also feel like I mean, I know we're on a new record, but I think that our engineer addressed a lot of that stuff last time, and he'll be happy to do it again. But, I mean, I'm not gonna give you technical expertise because not my thing.
Well,
Well,
Brooke,
I believe at the last meeting, there was a claim made that this would improve the drainage from what it is currently.
I believe it is that it will slow the rate at which the water is released, which I would think would improve, but I'm not gonna, you know.
Okay,
I'm
but
not
there's
gonna
someone
give
here who can answer
you-
those
Yeah,
questions.
we have a.
that's what I was gonna suggest, Brooke.
Yeah.
If,
Well, I don't know
Yeah.
who's planning to be here, so.
Yeah, no, I
that's
think-
why
I
I'm
think that's-
asking.
Our engineers are here.
yeah, I
Okay.
think that's what I had planned on after the public.
If-
You know, I don't even know the answer to that. I don't think that's, Amber, we have no, Charlie?
That wouldn't be appropriate.
Not appropriate, okay.
If
I
could
I
just
count on
just
council.
one little thing. Mary, you had talked about how I said that I had contacted you at the last meeting.
Well, let's have a rule here. If Mary can't ask Marie a question or Dan asks Marie, then let's not have it go the other
Oh,
way.
I'm not gonna ask a question, I'm just gonna make a statement. Is that cool?
I thought it was a question. I'm sorry.
No, I just, so I am truly sorry that you misunderstood what I said. I never tried to contact you, and at that point in time, I was not the lead on this project. But I did say that it was my understanding that two of our board members reached out to a council person, Wendy Hudley, and tried to set up some sort of connection with you. And I can't speak to whether that happened. All I can, I can only attest to what I was told.
Understood.
I have one more question. When, I believe that in our packet are letters from the Schofields and the Goyles.
Correct.
Saying that they have approved the plans. Do you know which plans they looked at?
I don't believe it says they approve the plans. I think it says they don't oppose the plans.
Well,
So
either way.
they,
Do you
I
know
think
which
it says that they
plans?
had the ability to, so I don't know what I mean, I personally talked to the Schofields, and I had the packet that, y'all look at, and so they did not really, I wouldn't say that when we spoke that they reviewed them, but they had the opportunity to, and they didn't seem very bothered by it.
Well, okay. Now, then there was another question about the deed. There's a question about how much property, how much acreage is included in the property that the
I think that would address it,
pool
yeah.
owns.
So
Has the pool ever provided the city or the engineering firm with the deeds to the property? So that can be
Not that,
calculated?
not that I am aware of. I will say that there was some comment, I thought that the comment was that it didn't match what was in TCAD. And I will say from my own personal experience with TCAD, it's not the most reliable source. I have properties and, the square footage is always wrong and.
Well, the reason I'm asking is that the application for a variance requires that you attach a deed. And so I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that the applicant has provided a deed to the property.
I am not aware of that,
And then I also saw in the notes to the survey, the diagram of the property, that since no title research was provided by the client, there was not enough data to accurately determine the position of that right-of-way. So that's also a question. Why has that information not been provided?
this is really above my pay grade.
have a copy of the deed. I will have to
Okay.
Okay.
Bree, based on the nature of Brooke's questions, and Brooke, if you agree with this, it might be better suited to have.
Absolutely. I feel
it
like this
looks
is
like
not-
you've
I
got
didn't
two
submit,
fellows back there that
the plans
sorry.
or design the plans or.
What were you saying?
I was just suggesting that, based on the nature of the questions, that it sounded like kind of engineering and all kind of other kind of questions, that it might be, if you yield your time, if there's no other questions that you think you might be better served at answering, It might be better, because I also wanted to hear from the engineering team as well, and I think it would serve, our neighbors and the general public in a good way. Because it sounds like there's some questions that, probably need to be addressed, right?
Well, I thought this was the time for us we closed the hearing and it was the time for the
Yeah, but
board
we're gonna
members
ask
to
the
address
engineer to come up
the
and then you ask
Correct.
those questions.
Okay.
Am I misunderstanding you?
Well, I thought you were asking her to leave the dais.
Not asking her to leave, just thinking that she might yield that
absolutely.
in order.
I'm
I
gonna
was
see
just
if I
trying to
have any more
answer
questions.
Sure, yeah,
questions.
absolutely.
I was coming up to answer specific questions, and that's,
Tell you what, hold on right there for just a second. Marie, Brooke's got maybe a couple other things to note.
And I guess as the representative of the pool, if the board were to grant the variance, would there be any objection to a condition added to that variance, both that the detention pond and the filtration system for the detention pond be certified to be built according to whatever the finally approved plans are?
That's just how the
Before it's
construction
covered up.
process
Yeah.
works. I'm an engineer. I've designed a ton of ponds. And I mean, everyone is going through state code and city code and everything is designed to make things better. And then it's checked by lots of folks and it's built like this. And all of your concerns, and I hope the engineer will talk about this, but like there is lots of hands that touch it and look at it and check it. The software they use is designed is like a United States wide one. I mean, there's so many checks and balances in place that it really shouldn't be. It doesn't concern me at all. And I've designed these 1,000 times because I know all the certifications that everyone has and all the checks and balances that go through it.
Well, the reason I'm asking this is because one of the concerns that's come up several times on the comprehensive plan strike force is the recommendation that the city require as-built certification for properties that have issues like this one, where it's essential that we get the design correct, and it's essential that the public be protected with respect to.
I'll buy that. I think that makes sense.
And if I could continue, one of the things that the comprehensive plan strike force is recommending is that as-built certifications be required. And so I'm just asking if this applicant would have any objection to that. That's what I'd like to ask.
I don't really know this, I mean, I'm not in construction and I'm not an engineer, so I don't really know the impact of that on us or really what that would mean. I would find it difficult to answer that question without, I'm the only board member here, so I don't feel comfortable. I just don't really understand.
Yes, I can understand that. I just wanted to ask.
No.
And, for purposes of what we're doing here today, one of the things that we are required to find is that approving this variance won't cause injury to any other property or to any other adverse impact to the public. And so I think we need to make sure that if this detention pond is what is going to eliminate any additional drainage concern from this property, that we get it done right and that we be able to enforce it and have periodic reviews.
Well, that's not really a question that I can really answer at this point,
Okay.
but,
All right.
we're trying to follow the rules that are set in place and all the, ordinances, and we have experts that we've hired, and so I'm sorry, but I can't really speak to it.
Okay.
I will
Thank
yield to David, unless you had something else specifically that you
That's
think
it.
I can answer.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
I hate to do this to y'all. Can we take like a 2 or 3 minute break?
Sure, that'd be great. And then I was going to
Can I
interject anyway.
This Coca-Cola is running through me. I got to get real quick.
Yes,
I'll
sir.
be right back.
Oops, sorry.
But I do think the as-built certification is that's smart. Hmm? I do think that the as-built certification is a good thing.
Well, and
I mean, assuming everyone, the assumption is that everyone does it correctly.
We shouldn't be having this conversation behind the scenes without it.
Okay.
We talk about the weather. Is it ever gonna rain or not?
Well, I was
thought we were
looking
gonna get it
today,
today.
hoping we'd get
I know.
something, but,
Hopefully.
well, and it looked, I didn't have a chance to look at the news today, but it looked like the, storm in the Gulf is kind of dissipated, at least, maybe hit Houston, but
Yeah.
I didn't get to listen to anything.
Yeah,
I
it
just
sounded like
watched
it's gonna
the-
maybe a little bit east, which would, take it away from us.
Yeah,
But we'll see. We could use some rain now, for sure.
yes.
Thank y'all.
Mm-hmm.
And Troy, just so I know, when we get cranking again, you said you had a,
I have some comments.
yeah, you got it.
And same here. I have another question or comment. We're gonna open it up for general discussion again.
Well, I think,
We're going to hear from the city attorney as to the process.
city attorney on process.
And then it's up to the board whether they want to open it back up. It's really, at this point, it's the.
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Yeah, I was afraid of that. My mic isn't working very well. I'm going to give some comments. As a matter of fact, if everybody's ready, we can do that now.
I think we're missing Keith. There he is.
All right.
I think we can get started again. Are we still on, are we still rolling?
We're still rolling.
Okay,
Okay.
great. All right, so, Charlie, go ahead, sir.
So I'm going to give some comments, and if, pardon the pun or not pardon the pun, I suppose. I need everybody to understand the rules of the game that we're dealing with right now. What my understanding is from reading the agenda, we're here to decide 3 variances. Right now, the variance before us is whether or not a tennis court shall be constructed or maintained in the area between the rear setback line and the rear lot line for the athletic club. Because apparently section 107.35 does not authorize that. And so they want a variance from that regulation. And they want a variance from 2 other regulations. I'm not going to read them, but they're requesting variances. So the first thing I want to do is make clear that the only thing that needs to be considered is what is required to be found when a variance is to be granted. I'm going to start at a very high level statement. The first thing we have to consider is state law. That's the first thing we look at when we're deciding whether or not we're going to grant a variance to a local zoning regulation. And the state law says that in order to authorize a specific, in a specific case, a variance from the terms of a zoning ordinance, the variance may not be contrary to the public interest, and due to a special condition, a literal enforcement of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship so that the spirit of the ordinance is observed and substantial justice is done. So when I give training on this, and I give training on this a lot to newly elected officials, to zoning board of adjustment members throughout the state of Texas, I always say what you're looking for is what the variance process is a release valve for when a development doesn't fit the rules because of some unique situation on the property that has created not just a hardship, but an unnecessary hardship to the applicant. All right, that's what state law says. So that's the first thing we're looking at is the state law. Those are the findings we need to make. All right, and those are the findings that will be if these variances are granted. Those are the findings that will be in the document that has been filed at the city secretary's office, because state law requires your findings to be filed at the city secretary's office, so that then gives folks the ability to appeal the decision to district court if they choose to do so. Any taxpayer can appeal your decision. So then the next thing we have to look at is what are the local requirements in addition to the requirements that are required by state law. And our local requirements say that the board must find that the variance is the minimum variance that will make possible the reasonable use of the land, building, or structure. Granting the variance will be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the division, which is the zoning code, and will not be injurious to adjoining properties or to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to the public welfare. Literal interpretation of the requirements of the zoning code would deprive the applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by the owners of other properties in the same district under the terms of this code. The special conditions with respect to which a variance is sought do not result from the action of the applicant. Granting the variance will not confer on the applicant any special privilege that is denied by this code to other land, buildings, or structures in the same district. If applicable, there is sufficient water and wastewater capacity, not applicable here. And granting the variance will not merely serve as a convenience to the applicant, but will alleviate some demonstrable and unusual hardship or difficulty so great as to warrant such variance. That's the state law, and that's our local code. That's what y'all get to decide. That's your purview. You get to decide it. You get to make the findings. Those are the findings that go in the report that this board will sign and execute as the findings that were determined that will be filed at the city secretary's office. Only those issues relative to those questions should be considered by this board. I say that to say this. The variance is only a variance to what's being requested. All other requirements, what I'm hearing about, the drainage questions, the impervious cover questions, whether it complies with all those things, those are separate issues. They're completely separate from the question of whether or not the variance being requested should be granted under the rules under state law and the rules under our general regulations. And that's because a permit has to be granted. Just because you authorize a variance to encroach within the setback doesn't mean that the applicant gets to avoid the requirements of our drainage requirements, doesn't get to avoid the requirements of our impervious cover requirements, or avoid any other regulation that they're not requesting a variance to. And so whether or not, from a standpoint of will this create downstream, is this a drainage problem, is a question to be answered in the permitting process. Because if city staff and their engineer and our engineer, the city's engineer, reviews their plans that they have to submit and that have to be reviewed, that have to be submitted by an engineer, and they don't meet the requirements of the drainage code, they won't grant the permit. You granting the variance does not entitle them to a permit. It just entitles them to place it in violation, not in violation, with a variance to the regulations that we have on our books. All right? So remember, it's separate issues. I understand the issues and the concerns asked, and what I don't want us to do is to go down a road where we're making decisions on issues that are not relevant to the variance request before us, all right? That includes whether or not it's good or bad for the WAC, to be quite honest with you. Whether the board approves it, whether the courts are in disrepair, none of that's relevant to the questions that you have to ask and the findings that need to be made under state law and under our rules and regulations. So let's try to stay on point with respect to the findings that this board has to make, which is there a special condition on this property that creates a unnecessary hardship that necessitates the variance? Is this for convenience, or is there some hardship that is being generated as a result? Now, there were some changes to state law that it used to be under the law that financial hardship was not something you could take into consideration. That changed, all right? The Texas legislature recently adopted a change to the Texas Local Government Code, and it's been incorporated. And it now says that when a board is considering whether or not a hardship exists for purposes of granting a variance, it may consider the following grounds as applied to a structure that is the subject and would result in a necessary hardship. The first is if the financial cost of compliance is greater than 50% of the appraised value of the structure as shown on the most recent appraisal roll. Compliance would result in a loss to the lot on which the structure is located of at least 25% of the area on which development may physically occur. Compliance would result in the structure not being in compliance with a requirement of a municipal ordinance, building code, or other requirement. Compliance would result in the unreasonable encroachment on an adjacent property or easement, or the municipality considers the structure to be a non-conforming structure. I don't think any of those are really applicable to the request for this particular variance, but they were added to the statute effective September 1st. What was that, 12 days ago or something like that? So, focus on what the law says. Unusual circumstance, special condition on the property that creates an unnecessary hardship, making sure substantial justice is done, and which is the state law, and then our local requirements, which specify what the findings that have to be made. But I do want to be clear that if there are drainage problems, that's not part of this analysis, all right? Because they still have to get a permit. And if the permit complies with our local regulations, they're entitled to the permit. If the permit does not comply with our local regulations, they are not entitled to the permit. And the granting of this variance does not guarantee that they will get a permit. It just says they're entitled to a variance from the particular regulation that is being addressed. Was that too high level or too low level?
Charlie, I'm going to tell you what, that was pretty darn good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, this isn't your first day on the job, huh?
Yesterday.
Yeah.
So my second day.
You know, given those comments, members, my initial intention was to hear from the engineers, certainly, because I think Mayor Farrell, Tom Farrell, had said at one time, it's like, a lot of times people like to be, in a positive way and in a healthy way, I like to be heard and I like to, get some answers to their questions. I initially had thought that we would be benefited maybe from hearing the engineers on how they might speak to, a drainage issue and a previous coverage issue. Charlie, and again, I guess the board members have to agree with me on this. I think that given what you've just stated, that we would not necessarily, given the permitting process and knowing that those things will be taken care of through that process, it may not be.
The board is certainly welcome to hear those discussions. I'm not adverse to y'all doing that. I'm just saying that those issues are not relevant to these variance requests because the permitting process will handle it. If an individual, there's a provision in the statute that allows an individual to appeal the zoning administrator's decision with respect to approving certain things, and also probably from the building code as well. If someone disagrees with those decisions, so there's separate processes for those types of issues. It's either going to comply with our drainage criteria, or it's not going to comply with our drainage criteria, and that's at the permitting level. that's not relevant to this discussion, and I would not want it to be part of the decision-making process as your attorney, because I don't want to have to defend it.
Understood.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
please
Uh,
do.
Under the ordinance 107492, subsections B2, it states that granting the variance, one of the conditions to granting the variance is that it will be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of this division and will not be injurious to adjoining properties or the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to the public welfare.
Yes, ma'am.
So you're saying that, where do you draw the line in how we make findings that granting this variance won't injure adjoining property or the neighborhood or otherwise be detrimental to public welfare?
That's a great question for this board to answer. But I can tell you it's not whether or not there's going to be a drainage impact, because the drainage impact is handled at the permitting level. It is a separate, requirement.
Let me ask this question in that regard. Here we have a variance request. The applicant has a non-conforming structure already. They're asking to increase that non-conformity. The impact of the increase, those are separate questions then, that is a separate finding we have to make here with respect to the fact that this is a non-conforming structure to begin with. And so it seems to me we can take into account that the expansion of that non-conformity will injure, whether or not it will injure or pose a danger to other properties.
Does the increase in the additional the additional impervious cover, are they required to submit drainage plans to take that into account?
Yes.
So that's part of the permitting process.
The other question is, our drainage ordinance, there's debate about whether or not, and I'm not arguing that here, whether or not that ordinance covers all of the impact from additional drainage. My concern in this application is to ensure that it won't further impact what is a known flood-prone, I don't know what the proper term is, drainway that crosses the McMahon's property and the neighbor. We have an infrastructure improvement plan that shows exactly where this drainage problem is, and it comes from the tennis courts. I mean, it comes from the park property and the existing tennis courts and parking lot.
Let me answer your question.
And so that's why this
Sure.
is a matter that I think is properly for public debate and properly for a decision as to whether this non-conforming use can be expanded in this particular condition.
Let me answer your question this way, because you make fair points,
Okay,
legitimate points.
thank you.
If this board decides that as a general matter, that this variance will increase impervious cover, and that is not a finding that you want to make to the extent it is not always go back to the law, right? To the extent that it is not in the spirit of the ordinance. In other words, the spirit of the ordinance is not being observed as a result of the general increase in impervious cover as a general matter. I think that's a perfectly legitimate consideration. But whether or not the increase will result in additional runoff or additional drainage issues, that's a matter for the permitting process. Do you see the distinction?
I don't see that distinction, and here's why. Because the permitting process doesn't prevent the drainage. It is how you manage it. It doesn't require that there be no additional runoff.
Yes, it does.
And where this
Yes, it does.
project,
No, I'm sure that it does.
It doesn't
because
require-
State law actually requires that.
Yeah.
it doesn't permit any additional increase in the runoff.
No, even our drainage
s-
code says that you can't
Yeah,
increase
that's,
the runoff.
I haven't even
on-
read it, but
I beg your pardon?
Our drainage code says that you cannot increase runoff.
yeah, state law actually says that.
Actually, what it says is that you cannot increase the rate of flow. It doesn't prevent the volume of runoff from increasing. And as I understand it,
The volume
maybe an
is an act
engineer
of
can,
God.
maybe an
much
engineer
rain
can
it comes.
respond to this, is that it will allow you, if today the runoff is 10 cubic feet per second, then tomorrow it has to be 10 cubic feet per second after the project is completed. It can't exceed 10 cubic feet per second. But it doesn't matter if that now goes 12 hours instead of 2. And it's only within certain defined floodplain increments. So
What you're describing is making the rain stop.
if you look at our infrastructure improvement plan,
Well, I think the discussion you're,
finish?
I think the
If you
discussion
look
you're
at
having is
our
not
in-
for me,
may I
it's
finish?
for the board.
May I finish, please?
It's a no,
I
not
have
with
a
me, you may
question.
not,
May
because
I
I'm
finish?
telling you, the discussion
May
you're
I
having,
finish?
the discussion you're having is appropriate for the board, and a good discussion for you to
Right.
continue having with the board, but not with me, because now you're making an argument to the board.
I'm not making it about you. I just want to be able to complete my statement of what the
I think that would be
concern is.
tremendous in the context of having a debate with the board after everything is given. I think it's a wonder, I think you're
Okay.
making good points.
I will ask the chair if I might explain my concern using the infrastructure improvement plan.
What I would like to do first is just get through, make sure everybody understands the legal issues, and then y'all can go back to debating, which includes the points that you're trying to make. And so if anybody has any,
May I finish with expressing my concern?
Brooke, we opened with Charlie. I'd like to continue to give Charlie the floor to finish his points on the legal side.
and then
concerns
y'all
he's
can
got, and
debate your
then
points.
Absolutely recognize your question within the context. of the
Okay.
And so I want to make clear that when we're having these discussions, we have to focus on what the law says with respect to the state law, the hardships, all of those issues need to be, because those are findings this board is going to have to make. And they are going to be on paper, and they're going to be submitted to the city secretary's office. They're going to have to comply with all of our rules and rules with respect to permitting, to the extent that some of those that we don't have rules in place that may create injurious issues, as the
Right.
discussion started earlier. That's a discussion for this board to have, and y'all can make those considerations. But I just want to make clear that the permitting process is a separate process from the variance process, which is what my main point was meant to be.
Understood, Charlie.
Okay, and that's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Well, Brooke, given that, yeah, absolutely.
And what my concern is here is that any additional stormwater runoff from this project will go into an area that's already been identified in the infrastructure improvement plan as it's the number 4 concern behind Kevin Shell's property in fixing in that improvement plan. Currently, there is, and this is, I can pass out copies of the infrastructure improvement plan, but this shows the 100-year storm inundation across the Schofield and McMahon property currently, without the addition of the additional impervious cover that would result from this project. It's not the impervious cover per se, that that I think this board addresses. It's the impact of additional stormwater that would be put into a channel where there's a problem today. So, and I think after Charlie's comments, my question is, can we consider that in addressing subsection B2 of the requirements for granting a variance?
I'm not an engineer, but it sounds like it would be an appropriate, from everything that you said, an appropriate discussion for this board for purposes of consideration. What I wanted to make sure is that we're not utilizing the permitting process and whether or not a permit may or may not be granted as part of your decision making, because those are two separate lanes.
Brooke, would it make you feel better if you knew that there was a system in place that checks all of these things and verifies that it isn't going to be detrimental downstream?
That's what I want to make sure of, and what I discovered today is that the plans that the Kerry has signed off on and the city engineer have signed off on have been changed with respect to the drainage. And I believe Kerry will confirm, as she did on the phone to me today, that they're going to have to go back through that.
That's
So
the whole
I wanna
process of
make
the
sure
checks
that
and the
we know.
bounces, and that, I mean, this is everything you're saying is 100% correct, and through the permitting process, through the engineer that designs it, through the city engineer, through the state code, through the city code. I mean, all of these things are checked and double checked. And I mean, granted, people can make mistakes, but I mean, we have to go forward assuming that folks are doing their job correctly, and these things are checked. They're not allowed to make the drainage downstream worse. And the fact that they're putting in a new pond that is designed to the current standards with the current rain. I mean, they've changed what the intensity of rainfall is throughout the years. And so by designing a new pond right now, everything is up to date. It's like buying a new car with all the safety that's built, and it's all being updated. And it's a good thing to have a new pond built. It helps everyone downstream.
Can we assume that the permitting department is taking into account the planning that she just showed?
We have to assume that because that's what their job is.
Right.
So we have to go with the assumption that everyone else is doing their
Well,
it's not
They're
our,
aware, I
it's
mean, they're
not-
aware of what
yeah,
what
it's
your
not our
concerns are.
job as the board
they
to
are aware
verify.
of it as of today. They were
Well-
not aware of it. It was,
I'll be happy to speak to the permitting
Yeah.
process if that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay. Good evening to the board. My name's Carrie Kaler, and I'm the Director of Development Services for the City of Rollingwood. Just to give you all some history on this project, I was approached last fall by the WAC board members and by MWN Design Group proposing this project. I received their application, I'll have to check the date, but I received their application last fall. In that application, I received their site development plans, their drainage plans, and a letter of approval from TCEQ dated, I believe, October 18th, 2020. We require TCEQ approval as a component of our drainage review. That takes many forms, but in this instance, where it's a part commercial property, we have a letter from TCEQ approving this project and the site development plans that I received. When I get an application, I take those plans and I divide them up and I send them to our reviewers. So I sent them to our drainage engineer at the time, who was Jay Campbell with L&V. I sent them to Lauren's office, K. Freeze and Associates. They're our drainage engineers. and then I send them to our building code reviewers. They review for International Building Code safety. Our engineers review, K. Freeze and Associates at the time was only performing our zoning review. L&V Engineers was performing our drainage review. I went back through, per my discussion with Brooke this afternoon, I went back and pulled the transcript history between our engineer, Jay Campbell, and NWN Design Group. The plans that I put in the packet were those original site development plans that I received October 2020. The engineers, as they do, went back and forth with some questions, calculation points to review. They reviewed that, and in December of 2020, Jay signed off on those plans. There were some calculation updates that were made to those plans, specifically to the drainage. They provided more detail on a bubbler and some various points. They also went in and added more points of flow on the plans themselves. I would call this proving up what was proposed in the original plans. There are some minor deviations in those plans in the drainage as comments were addressed, and it was at that time that our drainage engineer felt confident and signed off on them. Brooke had some concerns this afternoon that those plans were different because they were later. So those are the plans that are in the packet right now for your consideration. Those were the most recent plans that were approved. They were approved for drainage. I have not approved any building permits for this property. I have not approved the zoning for this property. What will happen tonight is based on the decision of the board. If a variance were to be granted, we would take that information. Lauren, who does our zoning review, who now is overseeing drainage as well, would take that into consideration and take her original zoning review, which called out these 3 items that are set for public hearing this evening, and she would consider the variances granted against her zoning review. If those variances were granted, then she would cross those off her list. If there were any other outstanding items for consideration, at that point, we would address any of those comments, and then once I have those approvals, I would release the permit. Do you all have any questions for me about that procedure?
When we talked today, I had understood that you believed that the December plans would have to go back to TCEQ for approval. Is that correct?
So if there are any changes to the plans, they will have to go back to TCEQ for approval. That's correct. I had Lauren, based on our conversation today, I asked her to review those plans against the TCEQ approval letter. The TCEQ approval letter approves them for 49.8. Lauren, do you have that calculation? Should have brought my paperwork up here. Approves them for 49.84% impervious cover. That's related to water quality. That has nothing to do with detention. If that amount of impervious cover changes per her review, then these plans would have to go back to TCEQ for approval.
So the TCEQ approval is tied to the detention, or the detention's tied to the impervious cover question?
TCEQ has impervious cover requirements. That's one portion. The city of Rollingwood, per our zoning code, has impervious cover requirements of 50%. We also have our own drainage criteria manual, which requires no adverse downstream harm. They work together, but they are not the same, and they cannot be considered the same. So if the applicant were to change their drainage plans, they would have to go back to TCEQ. If they're not changing their impervious cover plans, if they're not changing their water quality plans, this TCEQ approval will suffice.
But
If
the
that,
detention would have to go back to TCEQ for
no,
approval?
ma'am. This is the, if they do not change their impervious, if they do not change the plans as reviewed and approved by LMB, and this impervious cover amount doesn't change, and the flow patterns don't change, then this will not have to go back to TCEQ. So we will have to review with the engineer to see if that has to happen
you
or
don't
not,
know
but
yet.
that is part of our permitting process.
Okay.
So once we have all of our information, Lauren will do a final review and she will issue either final comments or final approval.
When I looked at I didn't realize until today that there was this December, that these were different, that the December plans were different. But it looked to me like, just trying to understand what the detention and issue was, it looked to me as if the manner of calculating what, and I'm trying to find the page here. Sorry. It's page 13 of 26 in the December plans. The calculations here, which are the proposed drainage area map calculations, and they have the runoff calculation, existing flow, proposed without detention, proposed flow with detention, the net change. That calculation, the numbers are very different than they were in July. If that's the case, and even the P1234, the numbers are different. If that is the case, does that have to go back to TCEQ?
We will just, our engineer's just
We'll
going to
have
have
to
to compare
Okay.
and make that determination.
All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
It sounds like, Brooke, and I mean, I'm addressing you because you've asked the majority of the questions, and good questions, as Charlie recognized. It sounds like, though, Charlie, and stop me if I'm wrong, that we've got actually a pretty good system, in the sense that we've got some backstops in the event that the board makes what are separate issues, in my opinion, from some of the questions that you bring up, although I understand where, I do get that one piece of the ordinance, and why you bring that to the board. But it seems, though, that we've got some great backstops rather, in the permitting process that would absolutely address, I think, the very issues that you bring up, previous coverage, drainage, et cetera, that we can consider kind of on their own merit, the variances in front of us. And we've got three, to be sure, and I understand they're related in a sense, being on the same property. But we can consider those things, I believe, with, some comfort on the back end that those very issues will be addressed and a permit will not be released in the event that, those things aren't satisfied. I'm seeing some nods, and it's almost a statement / a question. Just do I understand that? I mean, that seems like what you told me, Charlie, or told us rather.
I just want to make sure that we're not making a decision on a variance based on the permitting process.
Right.
Because the permitting process is a separate process that they have to comply with, and there may be aspects of impervious cover that are not related to the permitting process that the permitting process doesn't cover and needs to be taken into consideration. I don't know the answers to those questions. That's why y'all get paid the big
Huge
bucks
dollars.
to
Huge
make
dollars.
to make these decisions. I just want to be clear, though, that the granting of a variance does not guarantee a permit. They still have, except to the extent that you have some variance has been granted that they now don't have to comply with in order to get their permit, right? I mean, that's the point of the variance process. There is some unique situation on my property that creates an unnecessary hardship that I need a variance from. Otherwise, substantial justice isn't going to be done with respect to me. And that's what the variance process is for. And so, obviously, on occasion, you're going to grant a variance to where, yeah, they're now going to be able to build in the setback. Whereas previously, they wouldn't be able to build in the setback because they couldn't be issued a permit because the code disallowed building in the setback. So you're granting a variance that says you can now build in the setback. That's all this particular variance, from I can tell, is supposed to be about, whether or not you can build in the setback. Whether or not all the other parts of the project comply with the building permit and zoning process is to be considered through the permitting process. So just look at the variance that's being requested, look at the law, look at our local regulations, have a very robust debate, ask all the questions you want to ask, have a discussion amongst yourself, understand that the commissioner's signatures will be on the findings associated with this variance request and filed at the city secretary's office.
Well,
I think it's important to remember that any decision that we make, if it were to affect the downstream drainage of anything, it wouldn't go past the next step. Like it doesn't. The drainage shouldn't be something we're talking about at all, because we literally can't make a decision that would make it worse, because the permitting process would then stop it.
And that's where we ought to go with the rest of the discussion, in my opinion, as on the next three items, or I guess this item and the next two is, frankly, and nobody wants to do wrong by their neighbors and put them in a position where, you might, have an issue. And as I understand it, and I think it's clear at this point, that those neighbors will not be put in in a position where they're going to have I'll finish. Put in a position where they're going to be have a detriment to their property.
It legally can't get worse.
It can't get done. So that's how I'd like the majority of the conversation. And again, you can, I guess, bring up what you like, but I'd love the conversation to go in that regard and really get more specific to the variance requests, the specific ones, because I think that, as I understand it, maybe Brooke, that we would continue to go round and round on a drainage issue when I think we've got the backstop covered.
Us granting a variance doesn't give them permission to make the drainage worse. And I can't even think of a scenario where a variance would circumvent the state law.
When it gets my turn to express my contrary views, I will. But
Yeah, and I think we're there.
I
And I think we're there. So I'll
Okay.
go for it.
And it goes back to what we're being asked to do. Obviously, if the applicant were here today to just say, can we redo our existing tennis courts? That's one option. Wouldn't create any new additional impervious cover. It wouldn't create a new drainage concern. It wouldn't create a need to hold the water that new two courts creates. But that's not what we're being asked. And so we are being asked to grant an additional non-conforming use. And the question is, one of the questions is, does granting that additional use, are we convinced, can we make a finding that granting that additional use will not injure adjoining properties or the neighborhood? And so until I can make that finding, I can't grant this
Then you got a whole lot of
request.
school to go to before you can make a drainage finding.
And what we know today is that our city compliance officer needs further information and review to determine whether or not this needs to go back to TCEQ. She needs further review of plans to determine whether or not there'll be a drainage problem. So I just want us to make sure we're focusing on what we are being asked to do and what these criteria are. And I don't think we can presume, in the absence of evidence, that everything will be okay.
Well, then
Because
could you make a decision on anything then?
Because this is a unique situation where there's an existing, terrible problem. So,
I think never mind.
Yeah,
I think we can only deal with what we can deal with.
We're tasked with, can they go past what, three things? Can they, no tennis court shall be constructed or maintained in the area between the rear setback line and the rear lot line. We're saying, can they do that? The second thing we're trying to say is, can they build in 30-foot green belt zones? And the third thing we're trying to say is, or they're trying to pass, is the non-conforming structure, increasing the
Conforming.
that's what, yes.
Can we deal with all three at one time?
Yes, and the drainage stuff we have to assume is being taken care of by the city. I mean, I'm an engineer, but I mean, I might as well not be. We're not, assuming that I'm not, we don't have the capacity, the resources, the training, the knowledge to make drainage choices. That's what the city is for. That's what the engineers are for. The drainage just doesn't have anything to do with our body and our decisions.
There's one option we also have, and that is to ask this applicant to come back once the city has come to that decision, and we know what the answer is with respect to the plan that they have asked us to grant them a variance for. That's the other option.
They're in the process of doing all the drainage. So this is, the permitting process is being held up because they need a variance to move forward. There's no point in checking all the drainage. I mean, they've done it, but
Okay.
there's no point in
Let me,
checking all this stuff if we don't give them a variance.
when this matter came before the city council, what our city planning officer had explained to the WAC board in April was that in order to approve your building plans, we have to approach permit approval in a phased approach. First, related to impervious cover inconsistencies between the plan pages need to be addressed and clarified.
Yeah, what was the first
Then-
sentence you said
may I
there? What was the
finish?
first sentence?
May I finish?
The permit
Then
process.
Let's just let her finish.
Then I will set your plans before the council to review for comment. If you're able to provide clarification, we can do that on the April 21st agenda. If not, we can do it May 19th. That still is a pending question. So what has happened is that this matter has come to us, not in the order that our building official recommended, but before those issues have been finally worked out. So I don't know why this is coming before us, before those decisions have, I think one of our choices is to say, we can't make these findings until we know that the rest of the plan meets all the requirements. Or we can condition our decision on,
That the permit process
Well, no-
be taken through?
no, that the plans meet all other requirements, that there be no different treatment
That sounds great.
with respect to this applicant than what would be application of the literal terms of the ordinance.
That
Isn't-
sounds great. Let's add that.
But, I mean, that's implied in
It
the
is
process.
implied, but
I
we
mean,
can say it anyways.
It's not, but yeah, okay, I'm fine with that.
We can do that. I mean, basically it says here, you can add additional requirements on anything you pass.
Exactly, yes.
So we could do that.
What-
So we'll require them to get a permit? I mean, that's basically what you're saying, right?
Yes.
Like, I mean, that's,
I would go further than that.
But in essence,
I would go, if it's time for me to say what my proposal is, I'm happy to, if we're gonna continue and
yeah,
get
absolutely.
information.
Yes, ma'am. And I mean, you were more than willing to, at your will,
Okay,
propose,
well,
make a motion.
I don't know, I thought we were gonna hear from the engineers.
Would you like to?
I'm not running the show.
Well, personally, I'm good at this point, but if you would like to as a board member, I think we absolutely should.
All right?
Absolutely. Call the engineers? Perfect.
Here's where I'm going with this. And this is just, we don't have a process to require engineering certification as built for certain requirements, including drainage and impervious cover. Here we've got a project that once the top is put on the pond, we're not gonna be able to have someone certify it. While we have a set of plans that are working toward being final but aren't final yet. So, it seems to me because of the strong interest in making sure the drainage is correct, I would recommend that we require, attached to, if we grant the variance, if we can find the other conditions and grant the variance, that we condition that on the applicant giving allowing the city to come in the process and certify, have the city's engineers certify that the detention pond is gonna do what it's supposed to do. I can't define that. We have criteria. If we had a final plan, we could say that the detention pond meets these outflow requirements, and we would have a set of definable, enforceable requirements to hold them to with this permit.
That exists, and they do that before they let them build it.
What happens is that a permit would be issued and the project would be built. There's not a requirement that that be certified before an occupancy permit is issued. An as-built engineering certification, there's not that requirement in our code. There's not the opportunity, as I see it, maybe I'm wrong, that we can ask them to certify once the pond is built before the top goes on, that this is gonna meet it meets the standards, it's been built according to the standards in the plan.
I think that's just all part of the construction process.
Like the inspection.
That's why you have engineers on the job.
You're
We
not
can
allowed
all hope
to
that it is,
put
but
something
No,
on
but-
plans and build
unless
something.
it's required.
Can you get a CO if you, someone say it for me so I don't stutter.
Certificate
Then
of occupancy.
there's
Yeah,
one-
can you get a CO if you haven't built, what's on the plans to what is there?
No, and we require a drainage inspection before releasing a CO.
Do you require an as-built engineering certification for all permit requirements?
We require per the code that the engineer perform inspections of what is being installed. So she would go out and inspect those detention tanks, she would go out and inspect the end. Now, I can, as the administrator, require an as-built survey, which has been my intentions from the beginning, because there has been questions about, you name it, the pads under the picnic tables, to trees, to setbacks, to everything. So the most fair, equitable way to make sure that the applicant is both meeting their responsibility and that we're being fair with them is just to require an as-built at the end, and then we know precisely what has been built. And that is something that's within my ability to do on this project as a condition of releasing a permit.
Is the as-built just for impervious cover, or is it also that the pond and the filter system has been built according to the plans?
So the as-built would survey everything on the property at
And that would be our engineer going out and doing that, not the applicant's engineer giving an as-built certification for those plans.
It would be our engineer.
So what I'm saying is we need an as-built by the applicant.
Sure, and that is what I will require as a condition for permit approval.
And then the third point is, and we've talked about this in the comprehensive plan strike force, would be to have certification that have a requirement that there be periodic certification done by the applicant at their expense to show that any outflow from the pond is meeting the criteria that are required in the final plans.
So
Periodic meaning after
Yes.
This is also way out of the scope of what we're talking about.
This
generally,
pond,
generally speaking, it is the property owner's responsibility to maintain the drainage infrastructure that they have installed, period.
And then if they don't, the remedy for that is for the impacted property owner to sue the failing drainage facility. That's the remedy.
welcome to living in a neighborhood.
and so good luck to the McMahons that they'll have the funds to do that if this project doesn't,
But you'd have to
perform.
agree that, given all that's been stated, that unless literally the pool or WAC or they would be negligent if they didn't keep up with it and created a problem. You have to agree they would be bad neighbors at that point, and then there would be they'd be liable.
I'm not gonna attribute any bad faith to the pool. It is a project that's gonna require ongoing maintenance.
Sure.
And if that is not done, or if there are financial difficulties, we've seen a condo collapse because of lack of maintenance and kill over 90 people. It had all of the permits. We can't prevent that, but we can, with a project that's in an area that's sensitive and will have an increased difficulty. Our staff can't go underneath the pool and certify it or see what's going on or see that it's being cleaned. I think it's in the city's best interest to place these requirements on the.
This is city council stuff. We're the Board of Adjustments. I mean,
We
everything
have
you're
the-
saying sounds great, but city council, not Board of Adjustments.
We have the authority to add conditions to granting of the variance. The question is, should we?
You just want to add that there's an as-built survey done? I mean, that's fine with me, as long as we can move forward.
There are a couple of things. One, it's got to be built according to plan, so as-built
It has to
certification.
be.
All right, can I make a motion?
Yes, sir.
And then hope if there's a second, then we'll have a discussion, and if you want to add to the motion, you can. But I'm going to make a motion that we accept the applicant's request as presented on all 3 points.
I do want to add the same consideration that we had last time, that adjoining property owners.
Excuse me, did the,
So are you seconding?
did
I'm
the,
not, I'm
Okay.
adjusting it.
did the chair pull up all the
That-
requested, I thought you only pulled up item 1.
Well, I've got item 4 up, and that's what we dealt with last time. I was going to make note of that.
Or, I'm
Jim.
sorry, item 4.
Yeah, I was going to make note of that. Last time, Jim, you may recall, I didn't quite see it, that it was necessary, but council obviously said we needed to. We've got to deal with each one of these kind of
Separately.
systematically and separately.
Yes.
Well, okay.
And it
Each-
sounds as though,
each-
as you do this, Jim, and how we deal with it, we've got to go through the
Yes,
order.
each one needs to be
What page are we on?
each one needs to be dealt with individually on
And
its,
we need
on
to
its
let
individual
each one-
merits.
We're still on item number 4 as it pertains to that particular variance request.
Findings are in your other. Well, I think as you consider this, you have to consider the entity that is the applicant. And it's not a homeowner, it's a club looking at their property and looking at the best use of their property. And I think that, you know, speaks to a lot of the issues that we have to find. So, you want to read them off, or you?
That's y'all's.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure where we are.
Well, I think Jim is in the process of making a motion. I know Brad had, you know, and
Yeah,
again, we've got history here on this particular one, but, you know,
Yeah.
Jim, maybe take in consideration. Brad, go ahead on some of your amendment.
Oh, in making,
If
yeah, I got
if
it.
Yeah.
there is a motion to approve this, I would like added to it that the adjacent property owners must give written consent to it, and also on any updates as well. If the plans change, they have to.
I think the specific language used last time was abutting.
Sure,
Okay.
abutting. That adjacent abutting property owners have to give written consent to it, and further adding to it from what I did last time. This is kind of to hopefully make Brooke feel a little bit better. If there's any changes to the plans, to the approved plans, the abutting property owners must give consent again.
So can I
And I
ask
would-
we go into closed session, a consultation with your lawyer, please?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
So,
Where do we go about doing that?
yeah. At,
Should be on your agenda. Announce the time that you would like to go into
Yeah.
executive
No, just-
session.
Okay.
Consultation with legal counsel pursuant to section 551.071 of the Texas Local Government Code.
you don't have to announce all
I
that,
got
just
that, yeah.
consultation with attorney under the Texas Government Code
we'll-
at whatever time it is.
All right, we're gonna, at 8:20, we're gonna take a moment to consult our attorney under the Texas Government Code of, you know, the one.
How do we do
Everybody
that?
please leave the council chamber. Okay, we're good.
All right, so I'm making a note at 8:30, we've concluded that executive session, and we're now back into the discussion. We're still on item number 4.
So we still have a motion on the floor, correct? My motion.
Could you just for the record, restate that motion?
Well, I had originally said that I make a motion that we accept the variance request for all 3 of the items. But if it makes more sense to do them individually, then I'll start with number 4 on the agenda.
Yes, sir, let's do that.
Okay. Then I make a motion that the applicant be granted a variance for item number 4 on the agenda.
We've got a motion, do we have a second?
What do you think, Keith?
A motion to accept.
Sir?
Are we asking for a second?
Yes, sir, that's
I will
a motion
second.
on the floor.
You want more?
No, I'm sorry, did you second? I
Yes, I
can't hear
did.
you.
Oh,
Did he?
yes, he said he
Okay,
did.
sorry, these masks and that,
I'm
and
seconded.
the sneeze guard between us is tough. Okay, so we've got a second on that. All the, we'll go down the list.
Yeah, any discussion?
Yeah, is there any discussion on that? I think we've discussed it, but want to make sure we follow the procedures. All right, so we'll go down
Yeah.
the row here and take a vote on. I think it's worth taking a vote on an individual basis. Jim?
Aye.
Aye. Brooke?
I am not able to vote aye. I vote no. I do not find that this is the minimum variance that would make possible the reasonable use of the land. There are 2 tennis courts there currently. This variance isn't necessary with respect to the 2 tennis courts that are there. And I don't find that there is a hardship with respect to building 2 additional tennis courts on the property outside of the setback. Number 2, will the granting of the variance be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of this article? No, because it violates the zoning code. It violates the 30-foot greenbelt zone, which has been particularly important to this city with respect to park property, at those adjacent to park property. Will it be not injurious to adjoining properties or the neighborhood? I can't make that finding because we don't have the information before us that allows us to know how the drainage from the additional tennis courts that would be built will impact other properties. I can't make that finding because the ordinance, the setback ordinance, does not deprive this applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by owners of other properties in the same district. We have other park properties that are observant of the 30-foot setback, and there's nothing that I have heard today that tells us why this applicant must build these courts within the setback. Are there special conditions with respect to which a variance is sought that are the result of action of the applicant? Here, there's no special condition that additional tennis courts could be built outside of the setback. Will the granting of, I can't find in favor of the motion because the granting of the variance would confer on this applicant a special privilege denied to other owners of park property in that they would be building a building and expanding a non-conforming use within the ordinance that requires a 30-foot green belt. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Did your original motion include a statement of affirmative findings? Not all of them.
I did not go through them, but yes, in my mind.
Okay, well, so let's
yes,
make sure
we've
that's
met
clear on
that.
the record that your motion is a
Yeah, I think,
motion.
given the nature of the applicant and the property that we're talking about, yes, I feel like the findings are met.
Understood. Thank you, Jim. Chris Braden, aye.
Brad O'Donnell, aye.
Keith Martinson, aye.
All right, motion to approve variance at item number 4 is approved. So we'll move on to item number 5. Public hearing, discussion of possible action on a variance from the city's Code of Ordinances, Section 107-242, regarding the requirement of the 30-foot greenbelt zone for each lot in a park district which abuts a lot in a residential district for at the Western Hills Athletic Club at 4801 Rollington Drive.
Chris, will you please announce the time and open up the public hearing?
Sure, absolutely, thank you. 8:36, and we'll open up the public hearing at that time.
Do you want to ask if anybody would like to speak?
Yeah, sorry, I thought that was understood at this point. Yeah, does anybody like to speak
And
on
you
the?
might pull out your list too.
Say again?
Pull out your list of speakers.
Oh, well, the same list?
Oh,
There was one for each. I'm sorry, I gave you all 3.
Oh, they're all underneath here?
Yes, sir. So this is item 4, and we called on these folks. This is item 5, and there's no one currently
Okay.
signed up. Would anybody like to speak on item 5?
Absolutely, Mary. And this is what, this is the next item, item number 6. Okay, I got it. Thank you very much. Sorry, I had just all those stacked up on one another.
I'm confounded to understand how you can approve something that is supposedly a hardship. It is not a hardship for the WAC, but I can assure you it could possibly and easily be a hardship for the residents that are downstream especially down to Nixon. And also, I think it is irrelevant in many of the things we've discussed that you are applying such importance to the neighbors that are adjacent to WHAC when it's actually our property and the properties on Nixon and Pleasant Drive who will be directly affected. It's irrelevant. What the drainage from the tennis court is not going to go on the school fields property. It's going to come down our property. It's noted. It's in all the papers. It's on the plans for the detention pond. And so I feel like to not realize this is not a hardship for the WHAC.
Thank you, Mary. Do we have anybody else? Okay. Make note of the time again, right, Amber? Okay, 8:39. We'll close that public hearing and open up for discussion amongst the board. We're free to, obviously these are related, so we're free to make motions, we're free to discuss.
Just curious, does anyone know the history of the 30-foot green belt? Any knowledge of that?
No, sir.
Figured no one did.
Any discussion amongst the board? Jim, given your initial desire to roll these up into one, would you like to make a motion on item number 5 specifically?
I really do feel like they all go together, and I know this is hard on you guys, but I think we're being asked in some ways to do something that's outside of the scope of what we do. And I think we can approve a variance, and then we have to count on the rest of the people to do their job. And I mean, I just think that's what that's the way we've always done it. And so it's not easy.
Jim, I'll say this just to maybe help y'all feel better, which I'm sure it's not going to help, but just maybe, if they weren't asking for a variance and they were still building the tennis courts in a different spot, the drainage issues would be the exact same, and we still wouldn't have the power to stop them for drainage things. It is really a permitting thing, and it's really outside of us. To stop it for that specific reason is.
No, you said, when I spoke, I talked about the hardship. I wasn't talking, it's not a hardship for them. It's non-conforming on top of non-conforming. And I feel like this committee has been given this power in the city by the citizens to protect us. And you're not protecting us. If this was your house, I can assure you, I know all of you all, some for many, many years and some I've met recently, you would never, ever approve this if you were in our situation. Ever. It's not a hardship for the tennis courts. It is a hardship that should not be approved. And I'm sorry I'm emotional, but I'm just astounded that this is happening.
Well, I'll add this.
I'm
within the last motion made and the vote in favor of granting the variance, maybe piggybacking, I don't want to put words in your mouth to Brad, but there's a level of trust in our city staff, the engineers, the city hires. And I think it's been, at least in my case, it's my threshold has been satisfied that before anything gets built, the very concerns, and I believe that their warranted concerns are inherently going to be addressed through the permitting process, right? So and granted, understood that you've got drainage concerns, to say the least, right? And I am satisfied, which is the only reason I would vote, because I'm not trying to do neighbors wrong, but like those things are going to be addressed in the permitting process. I'm not even sure this is within our sort of discussion right now appropriate, but again, you're a neighbor. Yeah, you're a neighbor, and we want to treat neighbors fairly, and I think there's a level of trust that you have to have when you make that vote, and in your own city admin and your own city engineers, that those things are going to get taken care of to where you're not going to, your property's not going to be injured.
Well, I feel like that it's non-conforming. I have seen the people at the corner of Gentry, right across from the city hall, had to cut off part of their garage because they weren't conforming, and it was a few inches. They had to take off the whole two-car garage. When we're talking about beautiful parkland, we're talking about setbacks that should be revered in our city. This is our precious park, and as much I do like tennis courts, and I would be happy for the tennis courts to be different, but to have a retention pond, if the tennis courts are not even maintained now, they're in huge disrepair, and they have apparently, from what I've just been told tonight, how can we trust going forward that we're going to have 2 more tennis courts, we're going to have a retention underneath? How can we trust them to do right? I can't really, how can you all trust them to do right?
Well, separate
We
issue,
can't.
Mary, we can't.
This is not a part of this right now, but.
Yeah, to be clear,
No, that's
we're done with the public piece, but I mean, again, obviously, it's a small neighborhood, right? I mean, we're neighbors.
It is non-conforming, it is not a hardship, I'm sorry.
Understood, and it doesn't go unnoted in general. I forget where we are right now. Are we still within discussion?
waiting
Do
for a
we have a
motion.
motion on
We're
the
just-
table?
No, I have not made one yet. No, I mean, I think we have to consider that the owners of the park, which is really what the club is,
No, we're the owners of the park.
well,
We're the owners of the club.
the operators,
We're the owners of the park.
well, okay, technically, yeah, but the Western Hills Athletic Club wants to make a change to their property, is what it comes down to. And I think we have to consider that. And we can't solve everything that you would like for us to solve tonight, because that's not our job. And I don't know, I just feel like we have to rely on the other people to do what they're supposed to do.
In my view, on this vein, I think it is important to realize that as much as people like tennis, other people like a dry home. They don't want, and it's not just the McMahons that are impacted, it's everybody where this water goes down the last block of Nixon, because it's a problem now. We're gonna spend $1 million on it, and we're gonna add more water to it.
I mean,
And you've got to balance those two things.
You're the engineer. What's the existing runoff on the site?
Well, I'd have to pull it up on the plans to look at it.
Are you increasing runoff? Are you decreasing runoff? Or is the runoff staying?
Could we have
the
this
same?
person be identified, please?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
And
If you
come
mind
to the-
stepping up to
If
the
we're
mic.
gonna take more testimony now.
My name is David Cazares. I work for MWM Design Group. We're the consulting engineers for the project.
So I don't want to
So-
take up too much time, but is the
So-
runoff increasing, decreasing, or staying the same?
The peak flow is staying the same.
Okay,
The-
so
the-
nothing is going to get worse.
I didn't hear
The-
that.
the peak-
deep
the
flow-
Peak flow.
Peak flow, which is what the detention ponds are designed to regulate. And that's not going to get worse than it is today.
Okay, so it's going to stay the same thing. So, I mean, I think this is the permitting process, and we all just have to assume that everyone's doing their job. But, okay, thank you, that's all I had. I think that's the most important part.
Mr. Casares, would you agree that peak flow is not the volume of the water? It
That-
is the volume at the peak?
The peak flow is the rate at which water is leaving the site.
Right.
Correct.
Will more water leave this site under this drainage plan than was leaving the site before?
There will be an increase, yes, because there's additional impervious cover. It's not the 30,000 number that was mentioned earlier, the 30,000 square foot number.
I'm sorry.
It is not the 30,000 square foot number that was mentioned earlier. We're essentially adding 2 tennis courts to the site,
Well-
60 by 120.
May I have you turn to page 504 of the plan?
You can. Which plan are you looking at?
I'm looking at the December plan.
They're the plans that are included in the packet.
Okay. Which calculation are you looking at? Is it a bigger size? Are you looking at the curve number table?
It may be that it's the impervious cover where I found that number.
Yeah, so
I'm sorry?
one of the things to keep in mind is that the impervious cover numbers that are in the curve number table are based on the drainage area that the number occurs in. You said 504?
I'm trying to find my impervious cover document, and I can't find it. What page in the packet is that? It's, yes. Well, I've got to have the numbers that go with it. Yeah. That's where it is.
Page 36.
It's this document,
Okay.
and it's dated June 17, 2021. And it says that the existing impervious cover is 37,777 square feet. And it says proposed impervious cover is 31,336 square feet. So that's what I was saying, the square footage of the impervious cover is almost doubling.
Okay.
Is that right?
That is the proposed total amount of impervious cover, I believe.
I'm sorry?
I believe that's the total amount of impervious cover.
That is
The 37 plus the 723 plus the 31.
And I believe that that is, then if you look in the next column, it compares it to the well, I'm not seeing the total square footage, but that's what I understood that number to be, the current.
The total is listed right there below it. It's the 69,836.
Yes. But the current, I think what I said was that this would increase the impervious cover by almost double the amount of impervious cover.
Okay.
Right?
That's what it looks like, yes.
Okay. And with respect to, do you know whether the December plans have to go back to TCEQ for approval?
So my understanding is that if we're changing something that's material to what TCEQ approved, then we do have to go back to TCEQ to get it reviewed. If it is not something that's within TCEQ's purview, then they would likely not require us to resubmit.
All right.
But that is the kind of thing that we check.
If you look at page 504, or it's 13 of 26 with the December plan.
Mm-hmm.
This method of calculating the drainage area and the composite curve number and the outflow is very different than what was in the prior plan. Do you know if the method was changed?
So the July plan was the initial application plans that we submitted that were still in process with TCEQ. So when the final plans were submitted to Carrie, those were the plans that were approved.
Right.
And I'd have to go back and double check every number to see if there was any difference or not. And I have not done that.
It looked to me, the methodology is different just looking at the numbers. And
Well,
it looked to me that something changed in terms of the inlet at the front end of the courts where the water would enter what I think is the sediment pond.
That's correct, that is changed. So
Yes.
we have gotten rid of the sediment pond, and now we are treating it with a pre-manufactured water quality treatment system. So the whole water quality treatment and the detention pond are completely sealed off. The only way to get in there is to climb up the outlet or to be a raindrop and go through the inlet side, or to access one of the cleanout ports on the water quality treatment device. There's no other access currently proposed to the detention pond or to the water quality
And
feature.
that's a change from what TCEQ had
No,
approved before.
that is what TCEQ did approve.
I'm sorry?
That is what TCEQ approved.
Okay, so they required that change.
Yes.
And so now let me ask you this. What I had as the TCEQ approval document what, it's dated October of 2020,
That's correct.
and it refers to the plans that were submitted in July of 2020.
That's correct.
And these plans are December of 2020,
That's correct.
but I don't have anything from TCEQ that addresses.
That's correct. Would you like me to say why?
Please,
Okay.
I'd like to understand that.
Okay. So, once TCEQ has reviewed the plans for water quality, they have no other interest in looking at the project. If we've not made a material change to the project, there's no reason to resubmit the project back to them. So starting in July, the review process was strictly with the city. And the city is looking at the detention requirements, not the water quality requirements. So the two things are separate. They're related, but they're separate review processes. So the city, once the city has the letter from TCEQ that says this has been reviewed, right, that's what they require in order for us to make the complete application to initiate their review.
To initiate the city review process.
That's correct.
Okay. And we're not through that yet.
No, we're not through that yet.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions?
I think we're set.
Good. Jim, good on that? Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
It seems like we're all hesitant here. We're on the fence. Otherwise, if we weren't, this would have been done a few hours ago. So I can't believe I'm going to say this because I really want to see these tennis courts fixed up because I mean just having disrepaired tennis courts is just that no one uses is horrible. It's a horrible look for the city. It's horrible to go past. I want to see this fixed. I want to see this done, but we're on the fence, all of us. Maybe not all of us. And so, given that, I have no problem with agenda item 4 and 5. 4 we've passed. 5 is the one about the 30-foot green belt because of the existing courts being there, and I would really like to see those fixed.
We're still on number 5.
I know. I'm speaking to try to get us off the fence.
Gotcha, understood.
And unfortunately, I don't think this is going to go the way the majority of us. I think we probably all want to see the courts fixed. That being said, agenda item whatever, number 6, about increasing the non-conformity. I would say I would feel comfortable not approving that, which would essentially shut down this whole thing. And I would be one of 2 votes being against it, so there would still be enough to pass it. But if one of y'all feels that
It would not be enough to pass it.
We need 4 votes to pass.
Need 4 votes to pass.
we need 4 votes?
In this regard, given the type of property,
Well, then I think I would like to, I know we're not discussing 6, but I think ultimately I'm going to have to say I can't approve 6. So, but I do approve 5. So I'm going to make an emotion to approve 5, and then we can discuss 6 a little bit more probably quicker.
okay, we've got a motion to approve item number 5.
I will
Do we have a
second it, Chris.
Sir?
I'll second it.
All right, we'll take it to a vote. All those down the row, start with Jim. Jim, how do you vote? Aye. Jim?
I vote no because I cannot find that the required findings to support a variance to put 2 additional tennis courts in the greenbelt have been met. I do not find that we can make the findings that are required by our ordinance, that there's been a hardship, that it's the minimum variance required, that it's in harmony with the zoning code, that it's not injurious, I cannot make those findings as to the 2 additional tennis courts and the 30-foot setback.
Understood. Chris Braden, aye.
Brad O'Donnell, aye.
I vote aye. Keith votes aye.
Motion passes to approve the variance. Item number 5. So now we'll move on to item number 6. Actually, we've got a little bit of leeway in there. I got to read it aloud still, though. Public hearing, discussion of possible action on a variance from the city's Code of Ordinances, Section 107-422. A non-conforming structure may not be altered to increase the extent of the non-conformity for at the Western Hills Athletic Club at 4801 Rollingwood Drive. So we need to open it up to the public hearing on this as well, 903. And I've got, I'm sorry, separate. Yes, this is number 6. We'll start. Dan, you're top on the list here as well, sir.
Well, this has been an interesting evening for sure. I find that this, as an example, milk and cookies. Chris says, let's trust the process. That process almost had a commercial business in our park, because if the citizens had not stood up against that, that would have gone through. And everyone likes milk and cookies, but the government was pushing that. And this is a similar kind of thing is happening here. Without doubt, if a homeowner, if I came to you and said, my swimming pool's a little bit over the line, but I would like a bigger swimming pool, what are the chances of that being approved? 0. There is a difference between the club and individuals. But there's nothing wrong with having 2 really good tennis courts. I don't understand why it has to be 4. And I still maintain it is not a community benefit. It's wonderful to have it here. I love the club. We remember for a long time. But it's not open. I couldn't go up there and say, I feel like a swim today. You know, it doesn't work like that. Yes, it's great that we have that within our community, but I don't understand, and particularly after Charlie said, you know, we've gotten often talking about these drainage issues and things like that, but Charlie says that, you know, you are required to find that the elements of that last ordinance be met. And to sit here and say there is no hardship, you know, we're creating a hardship if they don't get their thing. That's just silly. It's just silly. The ordinance says you can't pass, you can't increase an already non-conforming use. Well, we're just plainly going to do that. I mean, that just doesn't make sense. That's not good government in my mind. So, I mean, anyway, that's all I got to say. Thanks. I do appreciate being able to reply to everybody.
Thank you, Dan. Sarah Hudson.
Sarah Hudson, 2805 Brockway. Been a resident of Rollingwood for 29 years. I've been a member of the Western Hills Athletic Club for 27 years, if I remember correctly. I am a degreed civil engineer, and there have been a number of things pointed out tonight that I would like to add some clarification on. You asked if the members of the pool had been informed of the project and that there was buy-in
I just
on
want to
that.
know if there was a vote, yeah.
There was no vote. I was not even aware of this project until it came before City Council last winter. Nobody that I have asked who's a member of the pool was aware of this. So I don't think that there is widespread knowledge that this is even going forward, and there's no details have been provided. I mean, I don't think anybody that, other than maybe the people that are here tonight, are aware of the number of trees that will be cut down and the drainage concerns that are going to be, that have not fully been addressed yet. If the tennis courts are in bad repair, they can fix those. So there's nothing preventing them from improving the courts that they already have. As far as trusting the process, the typical way that I'm understanding that a building permit is approved is that the city staff compares the plans to our code and makes sure that all the requirements are met before they approve the plans. And in this case, the impervious cover issues have not been assessed properly. And I think that one of the comment that was just made about impervious cover not in that drainage basin doesn't need to be considered. There's a difference between determining the drainage that contributes to what has to be contained in the detention pond and the 50% impervious cover limit that is required in our code, which is not the same. And you can't exclude impervious cover because it doesn't run down to that same point on the property. It still needs to be considered as part of the 50% cover, which has not been addressed. And the plan that is going forward at this point is to deal with that after it's been built, which I find contrary to our normal procedure for requiring that the plans demonstrate compliance with all of our requirements before the permit is issued, and then the inspections are done afterwards to make sure that the project has been built according to the approved plans. And that does not seem to be the way it's going at this point. I agree that I don't see that there is a hardship, so I don't know how you can find that the criteria are met. I went up there yesterday, and there's room for 1 tennis court or 2 paddleboard courts where the existing volleyball court is, but not requiring the variances that would require probably no trees to be cut down. You could put 1 tennis court or 2 paddleboard courts in there that would require no trees to be cut down, no incursion into the setbacks, and would probably result in not exceeding the impervious cover limit that is there in place. I don't see that that's being considered as an option. And I hate to even bring this up, but I would want to know this if I was in the position of having to vote, as you all are. After the notice was sent out to all of the residents of the city, talking about having to redo this variance request because notice hadn't been provided, I had a resident ask me if the Chris Braden on the Board of Adjustments was related to the Whitney Braden, who is a director or on the board of the Western Hills Athletic Club. And I believe that's your wife, yes?
Am I allowed to respond? Because I think I'm going to need you to finish before we get going.
Well, it seems to me that that should have been disclosed. And if I was having to vote on this, I would want to be aware of that fact before I had to take a vote. So anyway, that's what I wanted to point out. That was it. Thanks.
All right, well, we have Duncan Ashworth, please.
Okay, good. Didn't even sign up for it, but here we go. I thought Charlie did a great job earlier tonight, sort of detangling the variance discussion from the permitting discussion. And in the permitting, or in the variance discussion, said that hardship had to be presented. And it seems like for each one of these decisions, for the variance, it needs to be articulated. The hardship is so-and-so. And I really haven't heard that. What is the hardship here? And as a matter of record, it needs to go down. Here's what the hardship is. So if anyone that is in favor of granting the variance would like to come up here and state what the hardship is, I'd be glad to hear it, and I'm sure everybody else would too. So that's the law. A hardship has to be stated, and I don't think we've heard it. So thank you.
All right, so we're going to close the, I'm sorry unless there's anybody. Sure.
So in order to fix these courts, we can't just like resurface them. We've tried that multiple times. We have to completely dig these up, and it's my understanding that we would still require a variance in that case when we're completely redoing them. So from that perspective, I mean, I do feel like we're at a hardship. These courts were built in 1976. They significantly predate these ordinances. And we are a very unique piece of property in the city. I mean, we are the only privately owned park in the city. And I just feel like just having to do that, and Sarah had mentioned about some plan she had where we could not lose any trees. I'd love to see it. Because part of the way we designed this plan was to prevent the loss of more trees. There's a large treaty oak that is in the parking lot. If we move these courts back, we would definitely lose that one. We were trying to save that one. It's kind of one that's in the view of everyone in the neighborhood. And so if we move the additional courts back, we're gonna lose trees. I mean, and I am not a proponent for losing trees, but I think there is a tree ordinance that was put in place, and I think that really tries to balance the right of a property owner to develop their property along with preserving our canopy. And I know that people in our city council worked pretty hard on that, and we're adhering to that. So I feel like if we change this project around, we definitely could incur loss of more trees. That's something we were trying to avoid, and we definitely do need the variance if we're just going to even do the 2 courts. Thank you.
Do we have any other comment or any other comments for the public? Okay, no, we're going to close the public comment. Obviously, we can discuss item number 6. I think I know, in terms of Brad, how you feel about it.
Well, I mean, I can just give my 2 cents.
But before you do,
Okay.
I'll address, we've been, and I'm talking directly to you, Sarah, with regard to I got to take this off a minute. I've been advised by the city with respect to, you can put your phone down as well, too. I don't know if you're recording this or what, but you can do whatever you like. I've been advised by the city council, or not the city council, but the city's council, that there's no conflict on a legal basis. And I actually don't mind you bringing it up at all.
Wait, no.
I never said that.
There's
I have never had a conversation with you with respect to any alleged
okay,
conflict of interest.
Charlie, I'll back that. I'm not spoken to you about that, but I've been advised when this is brought to light that that there could be a potential conflict of interest. Personally, I didn't feel like there's a conflict of interest because in the year 2021, just as I don't get to decide for my wife the things that she thinks are important, she can't do that for me either. Okay, now I understand the human element of it would be to assume that a married couple would have similar viewpoints on things, but to be very clear, I don't even play tennis. Matter of fact, and I'm not trying to disparage tennis, but I like basketball. I coached college basketball for 10 years. So I don't have a dog in the hunt in this regard. I haven't gone to that pool. I went there yesterday for the first time in 5 years. So I don't really appreciate the accusation. And I get it. This is outside.
It's not an accusation. It's a statement of fact.
Time out, sir. Okay, I've been very nice, and we've recognized your comments in a non-public setting, so I feel like I need to make sure I'm very clear on something, okay? And you are right, by the way, statement of fact, she's my wife, love her to death, been married forever, known her since 5th grade. Okay, but that doesn't mean that we are in alignment on any one particular thing at all. I mean, I promise you, in the number of years we've been married, we've had a few arguments, as most people have. Okay, so what I need to be really clear on this though, just for future reference, because guess what? I'm on the ballot to be a city council person. So you want to vote against me? You know, go ahead and do it. But please, in this regard, don't think for a moment that I'm going to move on anything for this particular board here, the community at large, because I've lived here for 10 years and I've got a lot invested here. I've got a business across the street that depends on all of y'all joining and getting you right physically. Okay, so I've got a vested interest in making sure I do my neighbors right. Okay, so please, and so I'm looking right at you because I'm addressing you, you were addressing me. There's no conflict.
It's the optics, Chris. It's the optics.
Understood, optics. So in trying to address that, to be really clear, and I guess in the only reason I'm mentioning it, because there's really nothing to defend outside of just your opinion of me, is that I've made no motion here, intentionally. Wasn't going to make a motion, wasn't going to second any motions, didn't want to make this about me. Certainly I've got to vote, okay, but this was going to have to be the will of the board if it was going to go through. Now I've got line of sight that says it's not going to, and that's perfectly fine. That's why we've got these board members. So I need you to understand, and I need you specifically as well, Sarah, to understand that you were kind enough to bring this up.
I might ask that you not address your comments directly to her. She raised a conflict of interest issue. If it had been me, she would have raised it. And so if you could just address the conflict and not Sarah personally.
Sure, I can.
I think that would be more appropriate.
Understood.
Okay.
I mean, to be really clear, bro, like you know me, we've done this for long enough. I don't know all the rules. But in addressing everybody, there's no. All I can tell you is what's in my own sort of psyche. No conflict here, and again, we're going to vote how we're going to vote, and I intentionally didn't push anything tonight for that very reason. I don't have, and to be really clear, and I'm going to use the platform because I got it for a second. We volunteer in our community because we believe in service. Like, to be frank, half the reason I'm going to run for city council is because everybody you ask that might want to run for city council runs away like you're trying to kill them. They don't want to have any part of it. And so what I would like to try to do is do it in a different way where, you know, it would actually be something that people would like to get involved with. We've only got 548 rooftops in the entire community. That might be 800 people. That's not a whole lot of folks at the end of the day. And for about a fraction of those, 1% to even decide, hey, yeah, I want to get involved in that situation up there, be on the board of adjustment of city council. I mean, we'll be in trouble. We're going to be in trouble as a city because no one's going to want to lead it. Okay, so understand the optics. I get that. But I think it's worth addressing in this particular case, specifically as it pertains to these tennis courts. No conflict. Okay, and you just have to take my word at it, to be clear. Sir?
I think it would just have been good of you to announce that there was that your wife was a board member of the pool, just to get it out there in the open. We wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah, understood, and frankly, I'm not even sure, in retrospect, I could say I should have done that, mostly for the same reason that I don't think there's a conflict, meaning I'm not conflicted about my vote because of the fact that I'm married, right? So, like, I'm not actually going to be able to say in retrospect I should have mentioned that, right?
It's been easier to say that front than anything.
Yeah, understood.
I have a high opinion of you. I mean, you're trying to be very respectful.
Oh, no, no, I got it. And by the way, I mean, like, for a living, I've done confrontation. You know, I mean, you know, albeit with 18-year-old kids and old basketball coaches. So, like, I'm good. But I just wanted to make sure I made that aware. I made those in the room at least aware of that. And you can, you know, I'll walk out of here today totally fine with where I'm at on it. anybody can hold their own opinion of me personally that they like. But I didn't want it to go without, being stated this evening.
Chris, mind if I step up?
And say that. No, go right ahead.
Before I jump into the real meat of this, Chris is one of 5 votes. And I've always known him to be very upstanding and very kind and always thinking about what everyone else is. His empathy is huge, and he's only one of 5 votes, and I would not hold anything against him, and I feel like his input is through an empathetic voice, so I think he's fine. And I'd like to move on because I don't think his vote is going to matter.
I think you're right.
So since I kind of threw the wrench into this, as I stated before, I really want to see the tennis courts fixed. And so with item agenda 4 and 5 passed, they can be fixed. They can be torn up and fixed, and that is fantastic news. With item agenda 6, this is kind of pretty much pertaining to the 2 extra courts. In my mind, I can see those 2 courts being placed somewhere else. It might not be as ideal as going against the code, but I mean, I think, but it is what it is, and I'm willing for someone to convince me of the hardship to let them extend the nonconformity. But if no one on the board, not y'all, on the board, if no one on the board has a reason to change my mind that they have a hardship to increase the nonconformity, then I'm going to motion to deny this. So I'll let y'all collect your thoughts for two minutes.
My preference is a formal motion to approve and then a vote on the motion to approve.
Okay.
And because it needs an affirmative vote of 4, so if it doesn't get an affirmative vote of 4, it fails.
So I could move to approve it.
You
and
could
then
move
vote
to
no?
approve it and vote against it. Yes, you
Okay,
could.
Sounds good. Well, does anyone have?
Could you explain why you prefer a motion to approve rather than a motion to deny?
Yes, because the motion to deny will obviously fail because it only takes a majority of this body to disapprove that. It takes an affirmative vote of 4 for anything to be adopted. So I need an affirmative motion to approve the variance with a second. If it gets 3 votes, it doesn't pass.
That didn't explain it, but,
So, yeah, let me try again.
okay.
A motion, there will be if there is a motion to deny, 2 people will vote for that motion to deny, right? 2 people, the way I'm reading it, 2 people will vote for that motion to deny, and 3 people will vote against it, correct?
So we get nowhere.
So you get nowhere.
Okay.
So you need an affirmative vote to adopt it, a second. If it gets 4 votes, it passes. If it gets only 3 votes, it fails.
Do you have anything to say?
I will motion that item number 6, on the non-conforming structure, that we pass it, vote, motion that we vote to pass it.
I'll second it.
Okay, so we'll take the motion to approve that variance, item number 6, to a vote. We'll start as we have done with Jim
Aye.
and Brooke.
I vote no because I cannot make the findings required by the ordinance in order to find that this meets a variance standard.
Understood. Chris Braden, aye.
Brad O'Donnell, no.
Aye. Keith, aye.
Okay, based on what I understand about how these vote, the nature of the number of the votes, that motion fails.
Correct.
Understood. So we'll move on to item number 7. discussion and possible action to adopt a set of rules for the Board of Adjustment. And I think we've all
Before
got it in the packet, right?
we move on, because y'all can, I really encourage you to come back with a different plan. I mean, I feel like as of right now, you can definitely get the two ports.
If we've gone through this.
It's just really disappointing to be approved and have it taken away. I've never heard of any system like
And
that.
so you're not against impervious cover, you're you're fine if we just build courts in different places?
We're just gonna move them further on the property.
Same.
Which is, you're allowed to, yes,
Right,
I'm,
right.
yeah,
Perfect.
that's,
So we'll still have 4 courts, but just.
But double the cost. Because to do two different locations.
Brad's a good guy.
It's not gonna happen.
Double the cost for a nonprofit organization and possibly taking out more trees. I mean,
Yeah, this will take some bigger trees and.
doesn't make sense if you just did.
And we make everybody happy.
So let's stick on item number 7.
Chris,
Ma-
it's been requested that we visit the rest of these items, maybe call a special meeting and just, sorry. It's been requested that we postpone the next 3 items, call a special meeting so we can
Start fresh.
start
Yeah.
fresh, have some great discussion about this, also maybe some additional training for the board members.
At the same time.
That'd be great. Let's do it. How do we, can we make a motion to?
I would move we close the meeting.
There you go, and then we'll sort out,
Just close it and we'll hit it next time?
Yes, sir, we'll sort out the rest.
Understood. Do we have a second on Keith's motion? Got a second. All those in favor to close meeting?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting closed.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Man, that's how it rolls. That's how it rolls, man.